Welcome to a new inner journey that we have the opportunity to experience together again. Tonight, we will gently enter a space of stillness, where ancient wisdom preserved over millennia is waiting to be opened to soothe your tired mind and awaken the deepest layer of peace within. Before you begin, allow yourself to calm down. Feel the time, space, and place you are listening as a way to connect the present with the flow of the stories we are about to enter. I will tell you a collection of ancient parables, timeless Buddhist stories, selected not only for lullaby, but to unlock spiritual doors that have long been shrouded in worry. Each story carries a layer of deep meaning, a seed of wisdom capable of readjusting your entire inner landscape. They help you untangle the invisible hooks of anxiety, attachment to external things, and also insecurities that you have unconsciously carried with you throughout your journey. These stories are not merely a medicine for tonight's mind. They are the key to your direct contact with the depths of your being, something that the ancients, by contemplation and experience, realized a long time ago. They understand that well-being does not come from changing the world, but from changing their own perspective on it. The Persian poet Rumi once said, "When you become quieter, you hear more. And in the silence that you are allowing yourself to enter, you will also hear yourself." As we travel through these stories together, you will begin to feel a very slight but profound shift. The preoccupations that used to grasp your mind begin to loosen. The flow of thoughts that still run nonstop like a waterfall gradually becomes smooth, and you'll find yourself drifting easily into a state of natural stillness, a state that, as you've always been, is just forgotten. So right now, let your body sink deep into whatever fulcrum is supporting it. Take a deliberate breath. Then exhale slowly, as if you're putting down all that you no longer need to carry. Because right now, the truths that have been dormant since ancient times will be awakened in yourself. And the first story tells the mystery of identity, the story of the monk who forgot his name. On a pristine mountain road, Master Dogen stumbles upon a wandering monk sitting in the shadow of an ancient pine tree. The monk's robe was old, fading over the years, patched many times by endless journeys, but his eyes are unusually deep, a depth that can only come from decades of meditation and living with an awakened mind. Fascinated by the peace emanating from this person, Dogen walked over, bowed in the traditional ceremony, and said, "Good morning, brother. I am the Dogen of Ahai Temple. Can I know your name?" The wandering monk looked up, smiled with an immense gentleness, paused for a long time, and then replied, "Sir, I have forgotten it." The answer amazed Dogen. "You forgot your name? How can a person forget what has been attached to him from birth to now?" The monk just smiled slightly, as if the question was too small compared to what he had experienced. "Master Bai, for 30 years I have traveled through the mountains, sat in long nights in meditation, served passers-by, helped those in need, and lived simply with every moment. I was too busy living who I was, so I didn't have the time or need to remember what I was called. When I wake up, I'm simply awake. When I help others, I'm just compassionate. When I sit in meditation, I am just a presence. So what is the name for?" Those words made Dogen's mind vibrate like a door suddenly opened. Dogen asked again, "But if you don't have a name, how do you call yourself?" The monk replied, "The birds in the mountains recognize me by the sound of my footsteps on the trail. The villagers know me through the kindness I give. The mountains call me with the gratitude I have for their beauty. Every moment is enough for me to know who I am." Then he pointed to the ancient pine tree. Is this pine tree miserable because you don't know what its name is? Does the stream need to name itself so that it can flow? As the light of enlightenment flashed in his mind, Dogen bowed his head deeply. You have achieved what so many people spend their lives looking for, knowing who you are by letting go of what you think you should be. The wandering monk bowed his head and replied, and you also realize that fact in this moment. Perhaps we are both getting closer to our original nature. The Buddha once taught, you are not a name, not a body, not a thought. You are the awareness in which everything arises. From this story, a great truth is revealed. Our essence is not the titles, roles, or images we try to construct. The ego, or conceptual self, is always looking for ways to label, categorize, reinforce, to create the illusion of control and safety. But it is those layers of labels that become invisible prisons. Think about how many shoulders you have to wear every day. A professional at work, a family member, a friend who is always trying to be loved, the image you project to society. It all consumes energy to maintain, and every time those roles are threatened, you get anxious. But that worry is not you, but of the self that is afraid of losing the shape that it tries to create. The unnamed monk in the story embodies the concept of the primordial face in Zen, the nature before being dyed by all the stories about himself. It is not emptiness, but a natural form of living awareness that expresses love, discernment, and right action without reference to any fixed identity. Zen master Han Shan once said, "The daily mind is the Tao. To try to grasp it is to walk away from it." The more we try to be somebody, whether it's better, kinder, or even more enlightened, the farther we get from our inherent nature. There is a Japanese concept called mushin, which means mindless. Not that there is no mind, but that the mind is in a natural, pure state, unencumbered by thought, comparison, or ego. Like a master calligrapher holding a pen without thinking, the strokes flow out like the flow of heaven and earth. The other monk lives every moment without reminding himself to be who. Modern neuroscience also points to what Zen has long said. The so-called fixed self is just a product of the brain, helping us socialize, but becomes a burden when we believe it is the ultimate nature. We suffer when we try to protect something that only exists like a series of memories and stories. The Buddha said, in the end, there are only three important things: whether we have lived well, whether we have loved completely, and whether we have learned to let go. None of the three requires identity. All of them are natural expressions of pure being. Tonight, in the quiet darkness, can you try to feel yourself as a presence unbound by thoughts? Can you observe a thought without calling it mine? Can you feel life moving in your body without holding it? If you let go of all the labels, including your name, what you do, who you are in the eyes of others, what is left? That is the true being. The Buddha once taught, when you realize that nothing is lacking, the whole universe belongs to you. When we forget a name, we remember the essence. When we let go of our identity, we find the freedom that awaits us from within. Now, let's move on to another story, one that reveals the impermanent nature of all that humans have always cherished. It is the story of the empty cup of the tea master Yamamoto, who is famous throughout the region for the exquisite and majestic tea ceremony rituals that he has painstakingly cultivated through decades of practice. His every movement, from the way he held the kettle, poured water, lifted the cup to the breath between movements, was the crystallization of a life dedicated to serving the tea ceremony. His collection of tea utensils is not only an asset, but also considered a living legacy, each of which contains the history, enthusiasm, and quintessence of previous generations. Among these treasures, the most venerable was an ancient porcelain cup as thin as an eggshell, painted with cherry blossoms so exquisite that when the light shone on them, they looked as if they were swaying in the wind. That cup has been preserved through 15 generations of tea ceremony masters, and each generation sends to it a part of its story, adding to its reverence and intangible value. On a gentle autumn morning, as the red maple leaves began to fall sparsely on the mountain road, Yamamoto carried a precious cup, carefully wrapped in silk, to visit Zen Master Bankai, who was rumored to have profound wisdom in both Zen and tea. With respect and expectation, he hoped to have tea with Bankai, even hoping to understand more subtle teachings that he himself had not yet touched. Upon his arrival, Bankai greeted him with the simplicity and warmth typical of a man who had let go of all ostentation and invited Yamamoto into the simple but silent tent. As soon as he sat down, Yamamoto opened the silk wrapper, lifting the cup with both hands as a ritual. "Please allow us to drink tea together," he said. "This cup has served the tea masters for 400 years, each sip from it being a continuation of the lineage of those who came before us." In a moment, he lifted the cup to let Bankai admire its almost surreal beauty, something no one expected to happen. Maybe it was because of the thrill of meeting the famous Zen master, or simply fate. The cup slipped out of his hand. Time seemed to stop. The cup spun slightly in the air and fell to the rough rock, shattering into shards with a sharp and clear sound, like a small bell being interrupted. Yamamoto gasped, his face turned pale, and then immediately fell to his knees, tears flowing uncontrollably. "Master Bankai, please forgive me," he choked up. "This cup has survived war, earthquakes, centuries of care, and then it was only because of my carelessness that it disappeared. 400 years of history, lost in a moment." Bankai did not react with anxiety or regret as Yamamoto had predicted. He calmly bent down, picked up the largest fragment, and looked at it with gentle and curious eyes, as if he were looking at a small creature that had just been born. He turned the piece of porcelain in his hand, felt the texture of each broken line, and then asked softly, "Tell me, my friend, how old is this piece of clay?" Yamamoto looked up, his eyes red, confused because he didn't understand what he meant. Bankai continued, "Before it became a cup, before it was fired in an oven, before it was painted on those cherry blossoms by the artist, when it's still just clay in the ground, how old is it?" Yamamoto looked at the wreckage silently, and gradually a faint understanding unfolded. Clay, before it became any shape, existed long before every potter's hand. Bankai smiled and asked, "And how old is the earth that made clay?" "No age, right? And when this cup becomes dust again, blends into Mother Earth as everything must return, how old will that dust be?" The pain gradually dissipated in Yamamoto, replaced by a softness that spread throughout his chest. "Master," he whispered, "clay has no age. It just goes back to clay. The elements that make up this cup will become a multitude of other things: mountains, rivers, flowers, or new cups." Bankai gently placed the debris on the floor. "Now you understand the true nature of inheritance. What we pass on is not a temporary form, but our appreciation for endless transformation. 400 years of tea ceremony did not live in that cup. They live within yourself." The change was evident on Yamamoto's face. He laughed in deep relief and joy. "I'm so trying to hold on to the past to the point of forgetting the present," he said. "Perhaps the chalice has just fulfilled its final task, to teach me about impermanence." "That's right," Bankai nodded. "Now, shall we have tea? I have some rough ceramic bowls, and they will be honored to serve us today. The Buddha once taught, all things that are conditioned are impermanent. When you see that, you are free from all sorrow." The core of the story lies in the relationship between us and attachment. Why do we suffer so much when precious things dissipate? A broken item, a relationship ended, a job lost, a faded memory. It all hurts us not because of the loss itself, but because we believe that there are things that should last forever. Buddhism calls this illusion dukkha, the suffering that comes from clinging to the unattainable. We are attached not only to objects, but also to people, to success, to emotional states, even to idealized versions of ourselves. When these things change, as everything is forced to change, we feel betrayed. But as Bankai points out, nothing is really lost. There is only a change in shape. Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh calls this mutuality. Everything exists only in relation to other things. The cup is earth, water, fire, wind, and the hands of the worker. When it breaks, the elements are not lost, but return with a multitude of other possibilities. Understanding this, we move from fear of impermanence to impermanent gratitude. A beautiful flower does not become less precious because it will fade. It is because of its fading that we love it completely as soon as it is still blooming. Impermanence does not rob beauty. It makes beauty meaningful. The Buddha said, attachment is the root of suffering, but that doesn't mean we have to become insensitive. Letting go is not cold, but a broader form of love. It is a love that does not need to be owned. Gratitude does not need to be held tight. Care does not need to be coerced for a long time. When we understand that everything is flowing, we love more fully, live more fully, and are no longer afraid of losing anything because we know that nothing is really lost, just changing shape, changing names, changing shapes in the endless flow of life. Tonight, when you suddenly find yourself unconsciously holding on to something, a loved one, a treasured possession, a plan you've cherished for a long time, ask yourself if you can remember the lesson of clay returns to clay. Can you love fully while still being gentle? Can cherish without strings attached? Can cherish without trying to possess? Can you see things as temporary gifts from the universe? Gifts that don't belong to you, aren't held back by you, just come and go like magical breezes? What does it feel like when you allow yourself to enjoy the beauty of the moment without asking it to last forever? As the Buddha taught, in this world, nothing is immutable. It all changes. It all appears and disappears. It all passes. No one can find true peace if they cling to the illusion that something can last forever. Only when we overcome the fear of life and death, only by accepting impermanence as the breath of life, can we begin to experience a peace that cannot be taken away by time or circumstance. As we continue our journey through each of the deep layers of Zen wisdom, we encounter another story, one of the paradox between effort and surrender, between trying and letting go, between strict discipline and the natural softness of the mind. That story is called Students Can't Sit Still. The young monk Jishin, who had only been in the monastery for about 3 months, quickly became the subject of conversation among other monks. Not because he was outstanding, nor because of any special talent, but because he cannot sit and meditate. During the morning zazen sessions, when everyone sat motionless like ancient mountains, so quiet that he could hear the wind passing over the temple porch, Jishin kept moving. He turned around, adjusted his shirt, scratched his nose, moved his legs, tilted his neck, sighed, and then adjusted his shirt again, as if he had been bitten repeatedly by an invisible ant. His breath was clear, short, strong, and full of tension. Not long after, he abandoned almost every meditation session, stood up quietly, and walked around the back of the meditation hall with disappointed footsteps. During work hours, other practitioners whispered about him. Some sympathized, saying that maybe his body was not used to it. Some are annoyed, feeling that he is distracting. Others secretly judged. Maybe he's not determined enough. Maybe he's not suitable for this path. But Master Ryon, the abbot of the monastery, just watched quietly. He did not scold. He did not teach. He did not analyze. He did not give advice. For months, he just watched and waited. And one cold morning, after another failed sitting when everyone had left the meditation hall, Jishin came in front of him, tears welling up in his eyes. "Master, I think I'm really not suitable. I've tried, but my mind can't be quiet even for a moment. Maybe you should leave the monastery and go back to the family farm." Ryon looked at him for a long time, his eyes old but shining with compassion. Then he said, "Jishin, I have another mission for you. The garden behind the pagoda has now been neglected for months. Weeds overwhelmed all vegetables, and the paths were no longer clear. Can you take care of him?" Jishin bowed his head deeply, grateful that he still wanted him to contribute, even though his meditation failed miserably. "Yes, master, I will be honored." And so the next morning, instead of entering the meditation hall, he walked to the overgrown garden behind him. He knelt among the vegetable beds, feeling the soft, cool, life-filled soil under his hands. As he pulled out each weed branch, he realized which plants were thirsty, which plants had been shaded for too long. When the rain came, he sat in the warehouse, listening to every drop of water knocking on the roof like a bell. When the sun rises, he works slowly to the rhythm of his body and the weather. Days passed, and weeks passed. Jishin began to wake up earlier than the sun, eager to see the garden in the peaceful dawn. He learned to read the subtle signs of plants, which leaves curl up with thirst, which vegetables to water in the morning, which ones to take care of in the afternoon. His body gradually blends with the rhythm of the earth, the wind, and the sunny, rainy seasons. His movements become neat, natural, beautiful in a way that no one can teach, a grace of one who knows how to work with nature instead of against it. Then one day, while harvesting tomatoes, he suddenly realized that he had been kneeling motionless for more than an hour, completely present in the task of selecting each ripe red fruit. His mind was as silent as a rippleless lake. His body is soft, not stressed. That evening, struck by a vague but profound urge, he entered the meditation hall. He sat down, and miraculously, his body, tranquility. His heart calmed down like the afternoon dew. The breath is deep, warm, and even. For the first time in his monastic life, he sat for the whole session without moving. After the meditation session, a practitioner came to ask Master Ryon, "Master, what does gardening have to do with meditation? I don't understand." Ryon smiled, looking at his hands that were still on the ground. "I never taught him to meditate. I just taught him to stop fighting himself. In the garden, he learns to work with conditions as they are, rather than demanding that they be different. He learns the natural rhythm of effort and letting go, of concentration and relaxation. These are the qualities required to sit in meditation. The other student was still wondering, but why can't Jishin learn that while meditating? Ryoan replied, because of his particular mind, he needs to learn surrender through action before learning it in silence. Some people learn stillness through stillness. Some have to learn silence through movement. There is no better path than another. He continued, just as the ocean has only one salty taste, every true teaching has one, the taste of liberation. Jishin's story is proof that spiritual practice cannot be forced. It must spring from self-knowledge, from living in harmony with one's own nature. Why do we often suffer when we try to impose discipline on ourselves? Zen Buddhism calls this the aspiration of achievement, a nervous operation of the ego, always wanting to attain enlightenment as a trophy. We meditate with the desire to conquer our thoughts, to dominate our minds, to get rid of delusions. But that approach only creates a civil war. One part of us wants peace, the other part resists coercion. The more we suppress our natural energy, the more chaotic it becomes. Jishin's failure wasn't because his mind was too moving, but because he tried to force his mind to be immobile. Take a look at yourself. In meditation or in life, do you ever find yourself asking the mind to be still when it is in turmoil? Does it require us to concentrate when the mind is distracted? Demanding that we be happy when our hearts are heavy? Every time you're turning against yourself. Jishin's transformation begins when he discovers the right effort, an effort that is not tense, not forced, but flows with the natural flow of life. In the garden, he doesn't need to try to be mindful. Mindfulness comes by itself when his hands touch the ground, when his eyes observe the trees, when the breath is in harmony with the rhythm of heaven and earth. Zen master Suzuki Roshi once said, "You are perfect in your own way, and of course, you can still be perfected." That paradox is the spirit of Zen. You don't need to be someone else. You just have to be yourself in your purest state. The garden became Jishin's meditation hall because it provided exactly what he needed: purposeful movement, clear results, natural rhythms. Instead of trying to get rid of his dynamism, Ryoan helped him transform it. What makes him sit uneasy in the meditation hall is what makes him a great gardener and ultimately a deep meditator. That leads to an important realization. There are as many paths to entering mindfulness as there are many different human temperaments. Some people are suitable for sitting still meditation. Some prefer walking meditation. Some find presence in chanting, in labor, in art, in caring for others. What matters is not which practice is right, but which practice is in line with your deepest nature. Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh calls it Buddhism attached to life. Washing dishes can also be meditation. Taking care of children is also meditation. Cooking is also meditation, if done in mindfulness. Jishin's breakthrough does not come from a technique, but from an attitude, to cooperate with reality as it is. The Buddha taught that hatred cannot be resolved by hatred. It can only be resolved by love. This is true not only of external conflict, but also of the war we often create within our minds. When we hate our restlessness, when we hate our anxiety, when we hate our anger, we are nurturing them stronger. When we work with them with patience and compassion, they soften. Ask yourself, where are you fighting in vain in life? Are you trying to suppress an emotion, trying to dismiss anxiety, trying to force yourself to be creative, or trying to stop thinking? What part of yourself are you removing just because you think it's inappropriate? What if, instead of erasing them, you seek to lead them down better paths? Meditation teaches that enlightenment is not about becoming a different person, but about becoming yourself, unobscured by resistance, fear, and expectation. Jishin did not become a newcomer. He only returned to himself in the most natural way. Tonight, when you find yourself trying to force your mind or personality, stop and listen. That energy, whether it is intense analysis, deep emotion, unfailing curiosity, or abundant vitality, can be transformed, not removed. The analytical mind is not the enemy of meditation. It can become a great tool for studying the scriptures, understanding the teachings. Emotional sensitivity is not a weakness. It can be the path to infinite compassion. The parts you once thought were entangled are sometimes the doors that open to wisdom. The Buddha taught that you, as well as anyone in the universe, deserve to be loved by yourself. True spiritual practice begins with this complete and unconditional acceptance of oneself. It is not acceptance to maintain negative habits, but acceptance as the starting point of transformation. Not trying to be someone else, but learning to work with yourself with love, patience, and wisdom. When you sit down, when you walk, when you garden, when you wash the dishes, when you have a conversation with a loved one, remember three things. Impermanence is the essence of the world. Not going against yourself is the path to stillness. And full presence is the greatest gift you can give to any moment of life. Tonight, as you sit quietly with yourself and reflect on the spiritual journey that life has led you through, have you ever felt deeply that the greatest masters sometimes appear in forms that you didn't care about or even wanted to stay away from at first? Perhaps there are people whom you initially underestimate, misunderstood, or even dismissed, who eventually become the ones who give you the most important lessons. Insights that clearer and seemingly more reliable sources of knowledge cannot impart. And if tomorrow you go out into the world with the same openness as the spirit of Iku, who is always willing to seek wisdom in seemingly impossible places, what will that mean for your life? The Buddha once taught that when you truly see everything as it is, without repair, without molding, then you will carve yourself into a smile. Tilt your head back and look at the sky with a smile that cannot be named, a smile born of complete understanding. And when people realize that enlightenment is not something that can be bought or sold, we understand that it has always existed, has always been available, has always been given free of charge since the beginning, perfectly reflected in any mirror that we accidentally hold in our hands. A look, a story, a small event in life can also be a mirror of truth. From there, we enter the next story, one that shows that sometimes things that seem broken are of a much clearer, deeper, and more powerful service than what is considered perfect. It was the story of the bell at the temple, where the bell should have rang far away, but could not ring as it used to. Shunryu Temple, perched on the tranquil slopes of the Japanese countryside, has stood for more than 3 centuries as a spiritual landmark for the surrounding villages. The ancient bronze bell of the temple, cast by master artisans many generations ago, has for hundreds of years rung every morning to invite meditation and every evening to lift up those who seek contemplation. The deep and penetrating sound of that bell once passed through the deep valleys, marking the rhythm of life at the Buddha's door, and bringing peace to all who were lucky enough to hear its echoing sound. But one winter morning, after a violent storm, the bell suddenly cracked. When tapped, it no longer sounded as powerful as before, but only emit a suffocated, choked, poor sound. just enough for the people in the temple to hear, but completely unable to echo to the remote villages as before. The monks were upset because they did not know how to continue calling people to practice without the sacred sound that has become a 100-year-old tradition of the temple. Master Sengai, the elderly but wise abbot, examined the crack and estimated the cost of repairs. They would have to take the bell to a big city where artisans could afford to restore it, and that would be extremely expensive, almost beyond the capacity of the temple, which has very modest financial resources. However, the monks were not discouraged. They began to collect, save little by little, and received small offerings from the villagers who always respected and trusted them. And after weeks of effort, they finally accumulated enough. They happily brought the gold to Master Sengai, saying that they were now able to repair the bell and restore the temple's traditional invitation to meditation. But the very next day, a refugee family showed up at the temple gate. Parents with 3 young children, emaciated, exhausted, fleeing famine in the remote countryside. They had been walking for weeks with nothing but the faint hope of someone helping. Master Sengai immediately welcomed them in, and that night he used the entire bell repair fund to buy food, warm clothes, and other items they needed for their next journey of survival. The monks watched their hard-earned money disappear without saying a word, because they still respected the teacher, but in their hearts they were full of disappointment. However, they were diligent to start from the beginning, working harder, copying sutras to sell, and doing auxiliary labor for the villagers. 2 months later, they gathered enough gold again. But this time, before he could bring it to the master, an old and weak monk with a high fever lost his way to the temple. Once again, Master Sengai used the bell fund to buy medicine and take care of the old man. The third time, the money was used to help a family in the village who had just lost their home after a fire. Finally, unable to take it anymore, the monks decided to present it directly to the master, in respect but no less urgency. They wondered how the temple could fulfill its traditional duty without a true bell, how it could invite people to practice when the cracked bell could not exceed the 4 walls of the temple. Master Sengai listened very attentively, without objection. That evening, when it was time to meditate, he knocked on the cracked bell as usual. A choking thump sounded, but then something strange happened. Instead of the familiar silence or the few rare people who came to meditate, dozens of villagers appeared, walking up the mountain road in the sunset, looking for the temple more than ever before. The news spread throughout the region that at this temple, no one was starving, that those who are sick and miss a step are taken care of, that bell fund money always seems to find its way to the people who need it most. People come to the temple not because they hear the echoing sound of ancient bells, but because they hear an even stronger sound. The sound of compassion practiced, of living kindness, of humanity that transcends all forms. When the monks saw a large number of people meditating, more than at any time in the temple's recent history, Master Sengai just smiled kindly and said, "You see, sometimes a broken bell rings louder and clearer than a perfect bell. Our bell cannot cross the mountains and hills to reach the ears of the people, but our open hearts touch theirs. And think about it, which call would the Buddha prefer?" At that point, the head monk bowed deeply, saying that he now understood. They have placed so much emphasis on form that they have forgotten the essence, that what calls people to the Dharma is not the sound of copper, but the sound of love. A perfect bell only signals meditation time, and a broken bell, but knowing how to feed the hungry, is the call of the Dharma. The bell was never repaired again and still hangs today at Shunryu Temple. Visitors are often surprised by its strange, somewhat dull bell sound. But the monks smiled and told the story of how it was the breaking of the bell that became the temple's biggest lesson. The ancient Buddhist spirit teaches that when you think you can't do anything, it turns out that you can do a lot. Our limitations often open the door for us to express our deepest values in the most authentic way. But why do we think that anything that breaks down must be fixed perfectly before it can serve its intended purpose? Zen Buddhism points out that humans are bound in an invisible attachment to perfectionism. The belief that only when everything is perfect, complete, normative, can true spiritual value be created. And while we wait patiently for the ideal situation, the right conditions, adequate resources, a golden opportunity to do kindness or start to change, how many simple but precious opportunities have silently passed? Think about it. How many times have you wanted to help someone, but backed down because you felt that you were not enough? Not enough money, not enough abundant, not stable enough. How many times have you wanted to share a talent, an idea, a spiritual gift, but waited until everything was perfect? How many times have you wanted to start a spiritual journey, but said you would do it when you had the right space, the right time, the right equipment? While you waited for perfection, life, with all the opportunities you loved, studied, given, and received, went on quietly, not waiting for you. From Master Sangai's story, one realizes that in our spiritual journey and in our daily lives, what is truly powerful is not the ability to create perfect, but the willingness to act with compassion even in the very imperfect conditions that we are in. A cracked bell, in the Buddhist view, is not just a damaged item that needs to be repaired, but a symbol of skillful means. The idea that teachings are only truly effective when they are applied flexibly, adapted to actual circumstances, rather than rigidly clinging to forms and rituals that are considered ideal. The temple has the traditional task of using the bell to call people to practice. But when the bell is no longer able to take on that role, it is this limitation that opens up another, deeper calling, one that does not come from metal, but from the human heart. Limitations that they thought were hindering the practice suddenly became the door to a broader understanding of the true purpose of the practice. It contains a great truth of the spiritual path. Many times, it is the obstacles along the way that are the lessons we need most, and what seems to stop us is what leads us to true wisdom. A meditator who has trouble concentrating may cultivate greater compassion for others. A person who does not have enough time for a rigorous retreat can find awareness in every breath while taking care of his family. Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh once taught about mutual immediacy, that our awareness is not separate from the suffering or happiness of those around us. And Master Sangai understood that very deeply. The repair of the bell helps to meet the formal needs of the temple, but the use of the same resources to save the lives of suffering fulfills a deeper need to help people overcome suffering, which is the essence of Buddhism. When it's old, when its traditional sound no longer reverberates, the invisible call of compassion reverberates throughout the valley. Instead of just a few people coming to the temple to hear the occasional bell, now dozens of people, even farther afield, come one after another because they hear about the monks' open hearts. What attracts them is not the sound of metal echoing, but the sound of ethics being practiced alive. The temple's reputation is no longer encapsulated in the image of a dignified place of worship, but has become a symbol of widespread kindness, creating a stronger call than any sound of a bronze bell. This is reminiscent of the image of the sound of a hand clapping, a well-known Zen paradox, which points out that sometimes what seems missing is the greatest source of strength. Early monks saw only what they lost, the ability to perform a familiar ritual. But Master Sangai saw what they had achieved, an opportunity to demonstrate that Dharma does not lie in perfect rituals, but in the ability to respond to the world in an honest and kind way in every situation. As the Buddha taught, almsgiving brings joy in all three times: in the moment of the will to give, in the act of giving itself, and in the return memory of having opened one's heart. Master Sangai's repeated choice to put compassion before the need to remodel the bell is the full embodiment of that teaching. If we look deeply into our own lives, we will also come across cracked bells, places where things don't turn out the way we want them to. Maybe it's that the body is no longer as healthy as it used to be, forcing us to find ways to contribute in new ways. Maybe it's the tightness of finances, forcing us to discover true values that don't depend on material things. Maybe it's breakdowns in relationships, which help us understand patience, tolerance, and the ability to listen. Even failure at work sometimes paves the way for something more meaningful. What if the difficulties that seem to set us back are an invitation to manifest our best qualities? The story of the bell also shows us a great truth about community and influence. The people around us are often not attracted to perfection, but to honesty. A person who has endured trauma will easily understand and lift up others who are suffering. A person who has struggled financially will know how to share at the right time with those in need. A person who used to be lonely will become a deep listener. Our imperfections are the bridge for us to become closer to others. Zen master Charlotte Joko Beck once said that we are bound to make mistakes, and that the important thing is not to avoid making mistakes, but how we respond when mistakes happen. The way to behave within limits is sometimes not to fix it immediately, but to listen to what wants to be revealed from the limitation itself. Many modern studies of post-traumatic growth have proven what Buddhist masters have been saying for thousands of years. The greatest losses and limitations are often the catalysts for the most powerful qualities. The person who used to be economically miserable can become the most generous. People who have suffered from illness become a source of therapy for others. A former addict can become the most effective guide for someone who is lost. Where we've been broken, that's where we can heal the world. And that cracked bell, which still hangs in the temple to this day, still emits a deep sound that no one can call good. But every time visitors wonder about the strange bell, the monks smile and tell the story of how the crack has become the temple's most vivid sermon. It reminds us that efficiency and perfection are not the same thing. Sometimes the unfinished thing is the thing that is most likely to move people's hearts. It also shows that the goal of spiritual practice is not to attain higher states for oneself, but to live in such a way that one's presence alleviates the suffering of the world. Monks used to think that a perfect bell was indispensable, but they have learned that feeding the hungry and caring for the sick is a deeper form of practice than ringing a meditation bell. When we look at the places where we still feel broken, We can also ask, can those cracks become a door for us to serve others? Maybe financial hardship helps us understand and support others in similar circumstances. Maybe our strong sensitivity, even if it sometimes tires us, is what helps us comfort those who are suffering. Our weakest point is sometimes our greatest ability to connect and heal. The Buddha said that thousands of candles can be lit from a single candle without the light of that candle diminishing. Similarly, happiness never diminishes when shared. Master Sangai realized the temple's cracked bell could light countless compassionate candles, creating a call more powerful than any perfect bell. When we accept our cracks, sometimes the very break becomes music, a beautiful melody, not because it's perfect, but because it's genuine. In many cases, the strongest teachings do not arise from elaborate discourses, but from sincere commitment to what we really have. And this leads us to the next story, the story of the invisible burdens that each of us carries. That's the story of the empty backpack. In the quiet garden of a monastery, amidst the dewy streets and the clusters of flowers swaying in the sun, a young man turns to his master with a burning anxiety. His eyes shone with determination, but also full of confusion. He bowed his head and asked, "Master, why do you keep carrying the past? Why do you keep reliving old wounds, as if you can't shake them off?" The teacher looked at him with gentle eyes and then pointed to a maze made of translucent silk sheets that shimmered with light. He handed him a leather backpack, told him to wear it when he entered the labyrinth, and that the backpack would help him understand what he was looking for. But he also warned that it was quite heavy. The boy received the backpack, surprised that it looked light, but when he touched it, the weight seemed to weigh so much that he had to bend over. He walked into the labyrinth, the silk walls opaque as mist, and through the silk he could dimly see the silhouettes of others finding their way. He tried to turn left, then right, but every way was blocked. Tired, he wanted to take a shortcut by hiding under the silk, but then his conscience urged him to maintain his integrity. Just as he stood up straight with renewed determination, a gap suddenly appeared. He kept walking, feeling as if his perseverance had paid off. But soon, another wall blocked in front of him, and this time his goodwill did not open the passage. The weight of the backpack seemed to be getting heavier and heavier, suffocating his shoulders. He wondered, what is so soft and heavy? When he couldn't take it any longer, he opened his backpack. The inside was completely empty. Nothing. So what makes it so heavy? As he put it back on his shoulder, a voice from within seemed to echo. Look at yourself. The burden is there. The memories were like a rush of water. The childhood taunts, the hurt, the feelings of betrayal, the anger he had held on to for years. And the more I thought about it, the heavier the backpack became. He realized, I am the burden. I bring with me what hurts me. And when understanding flashed, he began to practice forgiveness. I forgive you, no matter where you are. Each word of forgiveness made the backpack lighter, and the gaps in the labyrinth appeared more, and the sunlight hit his face more and more clearly. When he recalled the loving moments in his life, the weight dropped almost completely. Finally, in the enclosed space of the labyrinth, he sat down to meditate, whispering, I am the light. I am the way. No one else is stopping me but myself. And when he fully understood that, his feet left the ground, allowing him to see the labyrinth from above, where many people still struggle in the darkness of their own making. In that moment, he suddenly appeared beside the teacher, as if the distance between the labyrinth and the garden no longer existed. He said with joy, "Master, I understand. It is the darkness you nurture that creates the weight, and only when you let it go can you gently soar." He smiled and asked him if he felt free, then silently let the knowledge seep into his mind. The Buddha taught that holding on to anger is like holding embers to throw at others. After all, you are the one who will get burned. The story of the empty backpack clearly shows that truth. The past does not bind us. What binds us is the way we hold on to the past. We often don't suffer because of what happened, but because we refuse to let go of what happened. An empty backpack is an image of unhealed emotions, wounds we hide and carry as if they define who we are. Why do we cling to suffering? Because we identify ourselves with it. Because pain becomes familiar, even though it hurts us. Because we misunderstand that forgiveness means condoning wrong, while forgiveness is actually freeing ourselves from the prison of resentment. In everyday life, the little things still weigh on us. Jealousy of our colleagues, the wounds from our parents' words, the regret of a lost opportunity. Each of them is like an invisible object in a backpack, making us walk slower. Jack Kornfield once said, "To forgive is to give up hope that the past can change." And when we stop trying to change the unchangeable, that energy will come back, becoming the power to build the life we want. Gently soaring through the labyrinth is an image of real liberation. The weight dissipates when we look within, when we face pain instead of fleeing, when we choose freedom instead of clinging, choosing to grow instead of repeating the same old stories. When we let go of these invisible burdens, we do not disappear from the world. On the contrary, we become light enough to touch others in the light of understanding and compassion. Tonight, as the doors of the day gradually close and the stillness begins to envelop the space around you, perhaps somewhere in your mind there is still some invisible burden. Each of us, when we put our heads on our pillows, carries with us fragments of memories, emotions that have not yet let go, worries about the future, or regrets about the past. Maybe you're holding something that makes your heart heavier without realizing it. And this may be the time to ask yourself an important question that we sometimes forget. Does what you're holding really serve your own best interests, or is it time to put it down as gently as if to give back to life what does not belong to you? The Buddha once taught, "You, like anyone in this universe, deserve to be loved and cherished." It is not only a philosophy, but also an invitation to return to compassion for ourselves, which we often give to others more than to ourselves. The path to inner freedom does not always begin with strong steps or great decisions. In fact, it often begins with forgiveness, a radical forgiveness for ourselves, for our mistakes, for our weaknesses, and for those moments when we thought we should have done better. It's a willingness to walk lightly through life's inevitable challenges, rather than resisting or avoiding them. And to understand more deeply the power of faith, of will, of shaping destiny with our own thoughts, let's look at a familiar but profound story. The story of the general and the coin that reveals the truth. At one point in Japan, a seasoned general was faced with a seemingly hopeless situation. His army was outnumbered, the enemy was stronger, and the terrain gave the enemy a distinct advantage. By all conventional military standards, defeat was almost predestined. Even any strategist would argue that this battle had only one outcome, a crushing defeat. However, deep down in the general's soul, there is still a strong belief that victory is possible. Maybe it's intuition. Maybe it's the urgent hope that arises in the darkest of moments. But most of all, he believed in the cause of his army and believed that even if they were outnumbered, the fighting spirit of his soldiers was enough to overcome all the difficulties that lay ahead. The problem, however, lies with the soldiers under him. They are not blind. They see clearly the difference in forces. They can count the superior number of enemy troops and sense the level of danger that awaits them. Fear quickly spread through the ranks like a contagious disease. Suspicion was evident on their faces, and whispered conversations in the night became filled with pessimism. The general knew that their morale had almost collapsed before the battle began, and he understood one truth: an army that believed it would fail was bound to fail, no matter how many weapons or skills it possessed. But an army that believes in victory can achieve the seemingly impossible, thanks to the spiritual power that burns within them. On the morning of the battle, the general led his army past a small temple where for generations warriors had stopped to pray before facing an uncertain fate. He gathered all the soldiers and prayed with them, asking for protection and blessings for the coming battle. And after that solemn prayer, he took out a simple coin from his pocket. He held it high so that all eyes could see it clearly. "My brethren," he said, "we have prayed, and now let destiny reveal itself to our fate. I'm going to toss this coin. If the face-up appears, we're going to win. If the face turns out, we will lose. Let's see what the gods have decided." The air becomes compressed. Each breath became heavy. Each pair of eyes followed the general's hand, as if all destiny hung over that single moment. He tossed the coin high, and the sound of metal swirling seemed to break the silence. It floats in the air before gently falling to the ground. And when they all bent down to look, they saw their faces turned upside down. The whole army exploded in extreme joy. People who were panicked just a few minutes ago are now shouting, laughing, hugging each other excitedly. They believed that the gods were on their side, that victory had been arranged. With that divine belief, they rushed into battle with such fierce spirit and strong coordination that they turned the tables, winning over a force many times larger. That glory has been recorded for generations. After the battle, a lieutenant approached the general in amazement. "Sir," he said, "unbelievable. The coin has truly revealed our fate, as if heaven had decided." The general smiled, took the coin out of his pocket, and showed it to him. The lieutenant gasped when he realized that both sides of the coin were face up. The Buddha said, "All that we are is the result of what we have thought. The mind is everything. Whatever we think, we become that." The deepest meaning of this story lies not in mere deception, but in the fact that fate often does not happen naturally to us. It is created by the very beliefs and expectations that we carry. Why is it so easy to assume that everything is predetermined, that success or failure is not within reach? While it is the mind, our most powerful tool, that has the ability to shape the way we experience life. The general does not deceive to deceive. He creates a psychological condition, a belief framework that allows the strong qualities of soldiers to appear. Soldiers are inherently skilled, courageous, and fighting, but their beliefs are clouded by fear. Double-sided coins do not create new power. It only removes the opaque dust that covers the power inherent within them. In the current life of each of us, there are also similar battles, goals, challenges, dreams that sometimes we do not dare to pursue because we think that the opportunity is too fragile or that we are not good enough. How many times do we withdraw before we start just because our minds are too busy thinking about failure? How often do we let fear dictate the extent of our own effort? Perhaps you have also regretted not daring to move on, not daring to believe that you deserve better. So sometimes each of us also needs our own double-sided coin, a symbol, a belief, a method, a new way of looking at life that allows us to approach life with a positive spirit and courage despite circumstances. That doesn't mean that just thinking positively will automatically go well. Just as soldiers still have to fight, sweat, and accept danger, so must we take action. But belief in our ability to succeed opens the door for our best qualities to be revealed. In the practice of Zen, one learns to balance effort and letting go, knowing when to move forward strongly and when to accept to let the flow of life lead the way. We can't completely control the outer world, but we can have a powerful impact on the inner world, which determines how we react to whatever happens. And it is that inner quality that often determines whether we succeed or fail. Zen master Huangba once taught that wise people do not cling to their own thoughts, but look directly at reality. The general in the story understands that. He looked at the reality of the human psyche, not just the number of troops. He knew that victory could not be achieved if the soldiers had surrendered in their minds. He helped them change their way of seeing, and in turn, change their fate. Look at yourself. Is there anything in your life that you're letting go of before you actually step in? Are there limits in you that are simply erected by fear and not by reality? Are you telling yourself a story that makes you weaker? And more importantly, is it time to rewrite that story? The Buddha once taught, "We are what we think. Everything we are is born of thought." This is not a miracle, but the truth of the creative power of the human mind. When you approach life with clarity, confidence, commitment, and belief in the good qualities within you, you will discover abilities that you didn't know you possessed before. And as night falls, as you prepare to close out another day, ask yourself, what are you carrying? What are you holding that no longer belongs to you? What can you put down right now to make your heart lighter? What double-sided coin can you create for your own journey? Because in the end, fate is not something that comes from the outside. It is born from the belief you plant in your life, from every thought, every choice, every moment of courage, and every time you decide to keep going. Tonight, as you indulge in the quiet moment of the day that is slowly drawing to a close, try to look back at the battles you are facing in your life and the results you silently expect. You may be wondering if you can find your own version of the wisdom that the hero in the story once possessed. Wisdom does not come from strategy or external strength, but from the ability to create inner conditions that nurture one's highest potential, rather than allowing one's deepest fears to lead the way. You may realize that, while fate is not entirely in your control, you have a profound influence on beliefs and attitudes that shape how fate unfolds through your own experiences. It is from that inner place that you can create a turning point that sometimes you think that the outside world is the decisive thing. The Buddha's wisdom once reminded us that thousands of candles can be lit from a single candle, and that candle does not lose its light. Happiness and light never diminish when shared. In the same way, the general's confidence comes not only from personal strength, but also from his ability to light the fire of faith in the hearts of soldiers. He did not push them to the front by order, but with a profound transformation in awareness. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can give to ourselves or to others is not advice or solutions, but rather to create the inner conditions for long-standing strength to emerge. By changing the way we perceive reality, we open doors that we didn't know we could enter before. Continuing our journey through Zen Buddhism's wisdom, we come to another story, the story of man's relationship with suffering, a relationship that is inevitable but can be completely transformed. This is a story of salt and lake, of how the same amount of pain can bring varying degrees of bitterness depending on the inner containment of each person. At a quiet monastery tucked away among the rolling hills, there is an old master known for his patience and deep wisdom. Among his students was a young apprentice whose heart was always heavy, full of complaints and worries about life. Every morning, he came to the teacher with a new list of annoyances. It was the noise that interrupted his meditation. It was the pain of the hard floor. It was the minor difficulties that he felt as if they were piling up until they became too much of a burden. The teacher listened to each complaint with infinite patience, but he quickly realized that words alone could not change the young student's viewpoint. One cool morning, as the golden sunlight peeked through the wooden walls of the monastery, he made a seemingly simple request. "Go into the kitchen and get me some salt." The young student was confused but still obeyed. When he returned, he placed a handful of coarse white salt in his palm. He told him to take a small glass of water, put a handful of salt in it, and drink it. The student hesitated, thinking that this amount of salt was too much for a glass of water. But the teacher only gently said, "Trust the process, just drink." And then he poured the salt into the water and saw that it dissolved into a cloudy, salty liquid. When he took a sip, his face immediately wrinkled, and the salty and bitter taste seemed to fill his mouth. He asked, "What does it taste like?" The student immediately replied, "It's so bitter and unpleasant that I can hardly bear it." He just smiled and said, "Very good. Now take the same amount of salt and follow me." The two monks and students left the monastery, walking in silence until they reached the shore of the vast lake under the mountain. The lake water is calm like a giant mirror reflecting the sky. He told him to sprinkle salt into the lake. Each salt crystal dissolved instantly, disappearing in the vast water. After that, he told him to drink water from the lake. The student scooped up some water, put it in his mouth, and was surprised by the pure and cool taste of the water. He asked, "Do you see the taste of salt?" The student shook his head. "No, not at all." The teacher sat down beside him, placing his hand lightly on the student's hand in a compassionate tenderness. He said, "The pain of this life is salt, no more, no less. That amount of salt is something that we all have to experience. But the difference lies in the container you put it in. You can choose to make a small glass where even a pinch of salt can make everything bitter. Or you can choose to become a large lake where the salt dissolves and no longer creates a bitter taste. Remember this. Don't make the glass anymore. You become a lake." The Buddha once said, "Pain is certain, but suffering is a choice." We can't escape the nature of life. Where there is hurt, there is loss, there are challenges. But we have the ability to decide how much of that pain will affect our hearts. Awareness is not a fixed thing. It can shrink until pain becomes all we see. But it can also expand to encompass the broader context of life. We often unwittingly choose to be the glass for three reasons. First, the natural human tendency is to focus excessively on the unpleasant. Second, the habit of creating a story from a painful event and then exaggerating it into a tragedy. Third, the comparison between reality and an idealized version of life that we think we deserve. The lake's perspective does not require us to deny pain or pretend to be strong. In fact, it teaches us to see pain as it is, without adding or subtracting, without exaggeration. When we are open enough, pain no longer controls us. Rather, it can become material for cultivating compassion, understanding, and patience. Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh once said, "Thanks to impermanence, everything is possible." When awareness becomes as expansive as a lake, we remember that everything is born, exists, and then disappears. No emotion is permanent. No storm lasts forever. We become lakes through cognitive expansion practices, moments where we stop, breathe deeply, and allow the mind to return to its natural spaciousness. When we meditate, we learn to rest in the full presence of the moment. When we are grateful, we open our eyes to see the good things that go hand in hand with the difficulties. When we serve others, we remind ourselves that our pain is not unique. It is part of a common experience that all human beings share. And tonight, as you reflect on the challenges that are present in your life, ask yourself, are you experiencing them with the mind of a small glass or of a wide lake? What if you allowed your awareness to expand to encompass the broader context of this moment? Can you feel that pain in that openness is actually only a small part of the big picture of life? The Buddha taught that if you want to understand your mind, sit down and observe it. When the mind is clear, happiness will come naturally. The clarity he spoke of was not the absence of salt, but the ability to contain salt in a space large enough that it would no longer make you bitter. And when you become a lake instead of a glass, you'll discover that pain is no longer a burden, but can become a door to compassion, freedom, and inner strength deeper than ever before. In the long journey of human cultivation, there are always stories handed down like torches that illuminate the difference between intellectual understanding and true realization. One such story is told from a large monastery called Chao, where hundreds of monks sit together every day to meditate, work, and study together in the majestic silence of the surrounding mountains. There, the rhythm of religious life for many generations has been preserved as a continuous flow. When the first light of dawn had just reached the distant mountain peaks, the monks completed the meditation session and went everywhere to take on the tasks entrusted to them by the collective. Some went to the garden to take care of the plants. Some went to the kitchen to make a fire to cook rice. Some worked hard by the ancient scriptures to copy the words one by one. And there were also other groups to renovate the houses that had worn out over time. That morning, like so many other mornings in the monastery, the abbot Cho walked the small paths around the monastery, observing and feeling the health of the monks, as well as their attitude towards their daily practice. His presence always exudes a peaceful but penetrating look. No one could have guessed that his seemingly ordinary question could be turned into a profound discourse, or that a seemingly sublime dialogue could be unfolded into empty concepts if the other person had not seen the truth directly. As he passed behind the meditation hall, where the community still gathers twice a day to sit in silence, Abbot Cho came across a young monk sitting alone in the shade of an old wooden building. At first glance, the monk seemed to be engaged in a form of his own practice. But what caught the abbot's attention was his absence from the general activities that took place on time. Cho approached, his footsteps so light that even the earth and rocks under his feet could not make a sound. "Brother," he called, his voice as smooth as water running through a rock. "Where have the virtuous people gone?" The question sounds simple, as if he were asking something very mundane, but anyone who has studied with Abbot Cho knows that every question he asks hides a deeper layer of meaning, sometimes one that prompts direct enlightenment at that moment. The young monk, who had studied at Chao Monastery for several years, looked up at him with confident eyes. He believes he has understood many of the key points of Zen teachings. His question seemed so simple, he even felt that this was a good opportunity to prove his right understanding. He replied without hesitation, "They have all gone to work," and pointed to the areas of the monastery where his brothers were hard at work. There was even a hint of satisfaction in his voice, as if that answer must have been what he was expecting. For him, a moral person is a person who is busy in service. As for sitting alone in silence like he is doing, he believes that it is a higher practice. But it was that moment that opened up an unforgettable Dharma for him. Suddenly, without warning, Abbot Cho reached deep into the folds of his old robe and pulled out a sharp knife, the blade of which gleamed in the sun. But what terrified the young monk was not the fact that he was holding the knife, but what he did immediately afterwards. In absolute calmness, the abbot stretched out his neck, left his throat completely exposed in front of the tip of the knife, and handed the knife to the young monk. His voice still as light as the mountain wind. "My responsibilities as abbot are too many and heavy," he said, as if he were telling a very ordinary story. "I wonder if you can please cut off my head. It will help me a lot." In that brief moment, the young monk's whole world seemed to fall apart. His eyes widened, and the hand holding the knife trembled uncontrollably. What he knew about the precepts, about compassion, about respecting the teacher, about spiritual practice, it was all like being thrown into a chaotic vortex. He could not understand why his beloved teacher had made such a crazy request, nor could he find in his treasure trove of knowledge a reasonable explanation. In a panic, he dropped the knife on the ground and ran away. Cho quietly bent down to pick up the knife, put it in his robe, and continued walking with a peaceful demeanor as if nothing had happened. For him, it was just part of the lesson. Gentle, natural, but touching directly into the student's delusion. And just as the Buddha once taught, it is better to go on a good road than to arrive. That story contains a profound lesson about the great difference between conceptual understanding and true experience. What scared the young monk to run away was not the knife, but the fact that his entire spiritual understanding up to that point had been abstract ideas, never rooted in real life. The human mind often likes to collect concepts, ideas about perseverance, compassion, meditation, enlightenment, etc., and arrange them into rigid patterns as if the concepts themselves were intellectual. But wisdom in meditation is not in words or in rational analysis. It lies in the intuition without thinking. It arises when the mind transcends the distinction between giving and receiving, good and bad, high and low. The young monk's answer, "They all went to work," revealed that he was still looking at life with dualistic eyes. He believes that there are moral actions, there are important works, and conversely, there are less sacred things. It is this separation that prevents him from seeing the essence, that every moment of life is a door to awakening, regardless of whether it takes the form of meditation or daily work. Abbot Cho's act of stretching out his neck and handing over the knife was not an extreme act, much less a real request to die. It is a direct lesson, asking the young monk to see the essence of work, the essence of ethics, the essence of compassion. If it is true that all moral people are working, what is the most important job? What work really touches the heart of reality? And when a person is carrying a great burden, as the abbot is talking about, what is the most compassionate reaction? By placing his neck in front of the blade, he is inviting the young monk to face reality beyond ordinary thinking. True compassion is sometimes not in beautiful words, but in the ability to transcend the framework of the ego to see the real need of the moment. Zen master Lingi once said, "If you meet the Buddha on the road, kill the Buddha." The phrase makes many first-time listeners afraid or misunderstands, but in fact it has a spirit similar to the teachings of Abbot Cho. Killing the Buddha means breaking down all the notions of Buddha that we are clinging to. When we cling to being right, to the ideal image, to conceptual understanding, we are tied up in what we think is enlightenment. To see the truth, sometimes we have to dare to let go of what we value most, including the idea of our own practice. The young monk ran away because he could not get over the veil of concept. He could not see that his request was a test of compassion, an opportunity for him to transcend the framework of dualistic awareness. His mind was pulled into fear because he could only interpret the teachings through the words, just like a person who reads sutras without knowing how to see the meaning of life right in it. That story invites each of us to reflect on ourselves. When someone comes to us for help, do we give them a sincere presence? Or do we just throw cliché advice at them? When we are faced with responsibility, do we act with living knowledge from insight? Or do we just act on patterns that we think are right? When a challenging situation arises, do we dare to let go of the notion of our role, the role of teacher, father, mother, friend, cultivator, in order to really see what needs to be done at that moment? In Zen Buddhism, people speak of great doubt, a powerful questioning power, not to dig up the past or doubt everything, but to break all hasty conclusions, all familiar patterns. Great doubt opens up great enlightenment, because it is only when we dare to question what we are most certain that wisdom can enter us naturally without being hindered by prejudice. Ask yourself, are we willing to let our most enduring spiritual beliefs be put to the test? Are we willing to let what we are certain to be true be shaken if it leads us to a deeper truth? Tonight, when you're faced with the opportunity to help someone, try to feel the difference between giving them what you think is good and actually listening to see what they need. When does true compassion require us to leave the safety of familiar notions? As the Buddha taught, when you take care of others, you are taking care of yourself. When you take care of yourself, you're taking care of others. When this connection is clearly seen, the boundary between the giver and the receiver disappears. At that time, the act of compassion is no longer something you do for someone else, but becomes the natural flow of an open mind. The story of Abbot Cho is a wordless reminder that living wisdom is not in the treasure trove of things we remember or things we can explain fluently. It lies in the power of absolute presence, in the ability to act without being dominated by fear, in the freedom to be free from all fixed patterns, including the pattern of practice. And when that freedom touches us, We are no longer the one who runs away from the master's knife, but the one who is aware enough to realize that sometimes it is what we are clinging to that is the first thing that needs to be cut off. Now, let's enter a classic Zen story where fearlessness does not come from muscle strength or weaponry, but from the complete letting go of what cannot be held, from absolute acceptance of the impermanent nature of life. This is the story of an encounter between a brutal general and an unshakable Zen master, an encounter that reveals clearly what true power is and what unconditional freedom is. During the chaotic civil war of feudal Japan, the armies of warlords like a storm of war rolled down the countryside, annexed villages, trampled on crops, and made the people live in constant fear. Every time the news of a cruel army approaches, the village shatters into chaos. People hurriedly packed up their belongings, led their families to run into deep forests, high mountains, or sought shelter in relatives' houses in distant towns. In just a few hours, the streets that were once busy exchanging goods became empty like a ghost town. All voices disappeared. All traces of life are silent. Everyone fled from danger. But this time, as the army raged into a small village, a strange thing happened. All had fled, except for an old Zen master who lived in a simple temple in the middle of the village. Smoke was still rising from the temple's kitchen chimney, as if nothing unusual was happening. That surprised the general who led the army and was a little uncomfortable. In the countless villages he had passed, no one had ever dared to stay, much less anyone who was so calm that he didn't bother to run away. Curious mixed with doubts, he decided to personally go to see who was such a brave person. As he and several of his lieutenants approached the temple, they expected to see an old man who was sick and unable to run, or one who was too slow to escape. But what they saw was completely different from what they imagined. In the quiet garden, the Zen master was bending over to take care of each tree. His hands were clenched. His breathing was steady, and his expression was peaceful, as if the outside world did not exist at all. The general was annoyed by this calmness. Wherever his army sets foot, the villagers are on their knees, bowing their heads, trembling and begging. They looked at him like a god of death. The village chiefs gave their wealth and food to buy safety. Here, this man didn't even bother to look up when he heard the sound of the mighty soldiers approaching. That, for the general, is not only a challenge, but also an insult. He is used to being feared and submissive by others, accustomed to trembling eyes and desperate pleas. This absolute indifference was beyond all the limits he could endure. His face darkened with anger. He approached, his voice filled with the arrogance and power of someone who was accustomed to ordering the killing. "That stupid old man! Don't you know that you're standing in front of someone who can stab you to death without blinking?" That threat once made countless people fall to their knees and beg for their lives. It used to bring down entire towns, leaving men crying and children unconscious in panic. But the Zen master continued to prune the withered branches on the small flower bush as if talking to the wind or clouds. There was no tension in his movements. There was not the slightest trembling on his face. When he finally looked up at the general, it was like the gaze of a man looking at a visitor who happened to visit, with no resistance, no submission. The Zen master replied softly, in a voice so calm that it made the soldiers standing nearby shudder. "And do you realize that you are standing in front of someone who can be pierced without blinking?" The sentence was simple. Not challenging, but it stunned the general, as if his heart was shaken by a truth he had never faced. Until now, he had known only one form of courage: the recklessness of the warriors who had been cornered, the desperate indignation of the losers, or the outburst of arrogance of young soldiers who had never tasted defeat. But this is something else entirely. This is not courage, not stubbornness, not madness. This is pure fearlessness, without ripples, like the surface of a calm lake, an unconditional acceptance of death, to the point that death no longer has any power over the person. In that moment, the general became small. He realized that his power, the right to take human life, only worked when others saw life as something to be clung to. But in front of him was a man who had long since let go of that notion. A man who has seen the impermanent nature of life so clearly that life and death are just two pistils in the same lotus, with nothing to fear, nothing to keep. And precisely because he had nothing to lose, he became invulnerable in a way that no sword could threaten. Without saying another word, the general quietly inserted his sword into its sheath. He turned away, leaving the Zen master to continue his gardening work in silence, as if the whole confrontation had just taken place was a fleeting shadow. The village was kept intact, not by fortified walls or shrewd negotiations, but by the unshakable presence of a man who had accepted impermanence to the end. From this story, one thing is clear. When people are free from clinging to things that do not belong to them, bodies, fame, possessions, status, threats lose their power. What scares most of us is not death, but the thought of leaving the familiar. It's not the danger, it's the risk of being deprived of what we're trying to hold. The general has power because others are afraid of losing their lives. But if he no longer clings to life, that power becomes meaningless. The master's fearlessness is not desperate or indifferent. He did not seek death, nor did he encourage violence. He simply accepted the fact that death was inevitable, and so there was no need to avoid it with the emotion of panic. That acceptance did not weaken him, but on the contrary, gave him a profound form of freedom, freedom from the grip of fear. The Buddha once taught that of all sentient things, nothing is permanent, so live with diligence, because life is a fleeting moment. When we truly understand that, we no longer close our eyes to impermanence, but open our hearts to it as a natural part of existence. Look at your own life. How much fear comes from trying to hold on to what you can't hold? We're afraid of getting hurt because we're attached to our self-image. We are afraid of failure because we cling to fame. We fear material loss because we mistakenly believe that it determines our value. We are afraid of change because we believe that stability is the foundation for happiness. But if we look deeply, we will see that everything we try to protect is changing by the minute. Nothing belongs to us long enough that we can cling to it and find peace. Realizing this doesn't make us despair. It liberates us. The Zen master's answer to the general was not to prove his own extraordinariness, but to point out the non-substance of fear. When we stop clinging to the notion of me and mine, we become nothing left to lose. And when there is nothing left to lose, we cannot be threatened. This is not carelessness, but deep freedom. Not passive before life, but alert to its truth. Not to give up, but to let go. The general, though he did not say a word, left the temple with a lesson he could not forget. True power lies not in the sword, but in fearlessness. True freedom does not come from avoiding danger, but from understanding that our nature cannot be destroyed by external upheavals. When we accept impermanence, we become like the ground unshaked by the wind, like the ocean unshaked from our hearts by the waves. It is the power that makes an entire army retreat from an unknown man. Therefore, when you face pressures, threats, and challenges in life, remember the image of the Zen master taking care of the plants in the garden. Ask yourself, what are we afraid of? What am I trying to cling to? And is that really as fixed in nature as we think? When you answer those questions, you can find within yourself a space where fear is untouchable, where acceptance is not weakness but freedom, where impermanence is no longer a threat but a truth that brings peace. The Buddha's wisdom reminds us that the whole secret of existence is fearlessness. When we understand this deeply, we become inviolable in the gentlest way, with unshakable inner peace, with the freedom that comes from not having to hold on to anything, and with the strength that comes from fully accepting what life has to offer. Let us continue to explore together a profound story of the limits of understanding and absolute honesty in admitting what we do not know. A subtle and valuable lesson passed down through a dialogue between a powerful emperor of Japan and a prominent Zen master named Gudo. The emperor, accustomed to receiving definitive answers from his advisors and scholars in the court, decided to go directly to Master Gudo to ask him the spiritual questions he had always been concerned about, especially about life, death, and things beyond normal human understanding. In the solemn reception room reserved for important court discussions, the emperor felt a rare comfort to frankly ask the most profound questions to the famous Zen master, who had spent his life contemplating and practicing the teachings of meditation. In the belief that an enlightened master like Gudo would surely have a profound understanding of the mysteries of life, the emperor began the conversation with a question that had troubled many erudite minds for generations. What happens to an enlightened person after death? Surely a person like you with spiritual clarity would have the answers to such problems. The emperor expects to hear a profound, insightful discourse on the nature of consciousness after physical death, be it insights of rebirth, of karma, or of the eternal integration of enlightened awareness into the vast universe. He prepared himself to listen to sublime commentaries on the subtle realms, on the decay of the individual to become part of the unity of the universe, or other profound teachings to relieve the great anxiety about this last secret. However, instead of a philosophical or mystical answer, Master Gudo just looked at the emperor with complete equanimity and answered as honestly as possible. How do I know? Surprise was evident on the emperor's face. He did not expect such a respected master to frankly admit his ignorance of a seemingly fundamental and most important question of spirituality. But the emperor, with his inherent power and self-assertion, did not easily accept that answer. He pleaded and looked skeptical. He is an enlightened teacher. Surely you must have special knowledge of such things. Immediately, Master Gudo replied calmly and logically, "Yes, sir, but I am not the one who died." The simplicity and sincerity of that answer contain a profound lesson about the nature of true wisdom, about the stark difference between true understanding and false knowledge. The Buddha once taught, "I know nothing but the truth about my ignorance." That ancient teaching shines like a beacon that lights the way for profound honesty, the characteristic quality of true spiritual maturity, that is, the courage to acknowledge the limitations of one's own knowledge. Rather than pretending to know things beyond one's ability, to perceive from one's current position. Let us ask ourselves, why do we expect spiritual teachers to have answers to questions that can only be answered through direct experience? Zen Buddhism particularly emphasizes the distinction between conceptual knowledge, things we can theorize and describe in words, and living understanding that is made up of real and profound experience. Master Gudo's answer was not an expression of intellectual helplessness, but a clear demonstration of true wisdom. He refused to speculate on the unprecedented, even if it meant facing pressure from someone as powerful as the emperor. That honesty and humility represents more wisdom than any complex theory of consciousness after death can provide. Looking back at our daily lives, how many times we pretend to know things that are actually unclear or uncertain? It can be in giving definitive opinions on complex social issues, in advising others about relationships, or in confidently predicting uncertain outcomes. We are often under pressure to present ourselves as knowledgeable, even though deep down we are full of doubts and uncertainty. It is worth pondering that the emperor's assumption that enlightenment must be synonymous with knowledge of death actually reflects a common misconception about spiritual development. It is often imagined that awakening brings about a comprehensive database of cosmic information rather than a fundamental change in the way we approach and live with the unknown. In the practice of meditation, we aim to cultivate the unknowing mind, an expansive state of awareness that does not try to fill every gap in understanding with hypothetical theories or beliefs. This is not ignorance or weakness, but a wise acknowledgement that only direct experience is truly more valuable than all old knowledge. Linchi once taught that there is nothing special to do, nor is there anything special to learn. Enlightenment is not a treasure trove of supernatural knowledge of things beyond everyday experience. An enlightened master is one who lives fully in the reality of life, not relying on assumptions or predictions about the future. What happens after death, until a person himself dies, remains in the realm of speculation. The Buddha once advised, don't believe just because you're told it, but believe in something after careful consideration and analysis when you see that it benefits and benefits all sentient beings. This is a reminder not to blindly accept any claim based on authority. Master Gudo's teachings reveal a great freedom, a liberation from the pressure to have an answer to every problem, a freedom from letting go of the need to know everything. How much energy and peace of mind do we waste trying to construct theories for the inherently unknown? How much suffering arises from worrying about scenarios that exist only in our imagination? Take a deep look at your own relationship with the unknown. Are you pretending to be sure somewhere just to avoid the discomfort of uncertainty? What if you could say, I don't know, with the same confidence and calmness that Master Gudo showed? The emperor seeks answers about death from a person who is living full of life. But true wisdom is not about accumulating information about future experiences, but about participating fully in the present reality. The mystery of death is not glorified by pretending to know it, but by living authentically and fully before facing it. Tonight, as you face questions about the future, about the motivations of others, or about the mysteries of the universe, remember Master Gudo's simplicity and honesty. Find in your heart the courage to admit when you don't know, to discover that the unknowing mind may be a wiser wisdom than all our clever theories. The Buddha's wisdom reminds us that the only true wisdom is to know that we know nothing in a world full of false certainties and self-confident ignorance. The Master's honesty in saying, "How do I know?" is a true tribute to mystery, a celebration of the unknown, while fully embracing what can be experienced firsthand. It is a poignant reminder to us of how to live with humility, honesty, and mindfulness in this turbulent and mysterious life. Our next story opens up a profound truth about how excessive attachment, even if rooted in love, can turn into something toxic, hurting the very thing we hold dear. This is the story of the chrysanthemum garden of a wealthy baron who lived in the ancient Japanese countryside, where the autumn mists gently drifted through the manicured fields and his mansion towered over the rolling hills. However, what really captured the baron's heart and mind was not wealth or power, but the garden behind the mansion, where hundreds of chrysanthemums of all colors ranging from deep purple and brilliant yellow to pure white burst into full bloom, each meticulously cared for with the same devotion a father gave their children. His love for those flowers was his whole life. He worked hard to study each flower variety like a passionate scholar, spending hours cultivating, caring for, and protecting them with absolute dedication. His knowledge of chrysanthemums like a living encyclopedia. But it was from that deep affection that something else, something darker, began to creep in and transform love into an obsession, an invisible burden that he himself did not realize. The baron began to pay more attention to his flower garden than to his family. His wife and children lived in a smoldering fear, always on the lookout for sudden outbursts of anger that could erupt at any moment over the slightest mistake near the precious garden. The subordinates in the mansion also clearly felt the suffocation. Anyone who accidentally damages a flower can also suffer severe punishment and fierce anger from the baron. The atmosphere in the family and the mansion became heavy, stifling with anxiety and resentment contained in everyone's hearts. Then one autumn day, disaster struck. A loyal subordinate in the midst of a hurry to carry out his mission accidentally bumped into a precious chrysanthemum, ruining its perfection. When the baron discovers this incident, his rage erupts like a volcano, out of control. His subordinates, although unwittingly, were still imprisoned and interrogated, and the humiliation made him unbearable. According to the warrior's rules of honor, he decided to commit suicide by ritual seppuku, a form of bowel incision to preserve his honor, rather than die in disgrace due to the negligence of ruining a precious flower. This tragic news quickly reached the ears of Zen Master Sengai, a teacher known for his profound wisdom and immense compassion. Understanding that a person's life is hanging in the air just because of a flower, Sengai rushes to the mansion to prevent the act of suicide. But he knew that saving a person's life could not solve the root of the problem. A deep and toxic connection between love and attachment that had taken shape and needed a more radical solution. On a rainy night, when the chrysanthemums were at their most vibrant, Zen Master Sengai quietly sneaked into the baron's garden, carrying a sharp sickle. In the murky darkness, he began his work with patience and method, cutting down flowers one by one, hundreds of flowers that symbolized the baron's years of care and pride. The sound of flowers falling to the ground echoed through the quiet space, waking the baron up. He rushed to the window and discovered the dark scene in his garden. Grasping his sword, he ran out in anger and panic, demanding to know who was destroying the precious garden. Sengai, standing in the middle of a pile of chrysanthemums that had been cut down, replied calmly, "Even weeds like this will eventually become dangerous if not pruned." The perfect equality of his words astonished the Baron. In that moment, the Baron's obsession shattered like broken glass. He realized that the flowers he considered most precious were ultimately just weeds in the eyes of his teacher. And more importantly, they were a symbol of his blind dependence and attachment. Awake as if he had just woken up from a fever dream, the Baron realized the distortion in his way of seeing, the overestimation that caused love to turn into possession and control. From that night onwards, he never replanted chrysanthemums. The Buddha once taught that attachment is the root of suffering, and the Baron's lesson is a living testament to that truth. When we cling too much to anything, whether beautiful or precious, our love will gradually degenerate into possession and control, and the inherent beauty of nature will become a source of fear and suffering, not only for ourselves, but also for those around us. The question is, why do we confuse sincere love with possession? Buddhism explains that the human mind, the ego, always seeks security through control, trying to hold on to things that are inherently impermanent and cannot be kept forever. True love is appreciation without possession, enjoyment without clinging, caring without control. In contrast, attachment and possessive love try to freeze the beauty of the object, turning the person or thing to be loved into an extension of the ego, a part of identity that we must keep at all costs. The pattern of this attachment can be easily seen in modern relationships. Parents who love their children to the point of controlling their every action and development. Possessive partners who make the relationship full of jealousy and suspicion. Or material collectors who indulge in attachment to possessions and forget about their feelings. Real fun experiencing them. The chrysanthemum in the story is a symbol of anything we value beyond the logical limits of the natural order, be it career success, appearance, spiritual achievements, or a carefully orchestrated lifestyle. When attachment becomes excessive, it not only creates suffering for ourselves, but it also spreads, affecting everyone in our orbit of life. Zen master Suzuki Roshi once said, "Each of you is perfect in your own way, but at the same time, you can improve a little." This quote highlights a profound paradox, the delicate balance between appreciation and attachment. We can love something completely while retaining gentleness and sincere concern without being bound by results or possessions. It is a state that everyone needs to aim for. Sengai's drastic action, the cutting down of the chrysanthemum garden, was a testament to the shock pill needed to break the patterns of deep attachment that existed in the Baron's mind and life. Sometimes, we also need external influences, losses, or unexpected changes to strip away what we are blindly clinging to so that we can look at things more clearly and insightfully. Loss, disappointment, and impermanence, despite their pain, have always been dedicated teachers who teach us the difference between sincere love and possessive attachment. Notably, the Baron not only adjusted his way of growing flowers or changed the way he cared for the garden, but he completely stopped growing chrysanthemums. This suggests that sometimes the wisest response to attachment is not to hold on to, but to withdraw completely, creating space for us to recuperate, to re-examine our relationship with the object of love in a more free and sober way, so that we can rebuild our connection with greater freedom and wisdom. The story of the chrysanthemum garden is not only a lesson in attachment and love, but also a testament to our deep understanding of Buddhist and Zen philosophy, of how we can live fully without being shackled by possessive desires and desires. It invites us to love and appreciate everything in life in a gentle and subtle way, not letting attachment obscure the light of true love, so that we can live serenely and peacefully in the midst of life's vicissitudes and impermanence. Tonight, as you sit and reflect on your own life, you may be wondering what your chrysanthemum garden is. Is there something that you love so intensely that it makes you or someone else feel stressed, controlled, or distressed? In life, there are many things that we are deeply attached to, from hobbies, goals, to relationships, work, or spiritual values. But it's that excessive attachment at times that causes us to become heavy, stressed, and lose our freedom of mind. Can you imagine appreciating those things to the fullest while still keeping them lighter and more airy? The Buddha's profound wisdom reminds us that in this life, only three things really matter: how much you love, how gently you live, and how gracefully you let go of things that don't belong to you. This is not only a reminder, but also a guideline for a peaceful and happy life. True love, according to the Buddhist teachings, is not possession but freedom, trusting in the natural flow of life, birth, existence, and perish. When we love sincerely, we let go of fear, let go of possession and control. That love gives freedom to what we cherish, not trying to hold on to it to make ourselves and others suffer. And with that in mind, we continue our journey, entering another story, the story of the transformative power of fearlessness and unconditional compassion. This is the story of the thief and the Zen master Shichiri Kojun, a living testament to the power of kindness and non-resistance in the face of violence. On a peaceful evening, when the sunset stains the sky red with vibrant shades of purple and yellow, Zen master Shichiri Kojun sits in his simple home, chanting serenely. His voice flowed evenly, like a gentle stream spreading peace through each quiet room. Every word he uttered was like a meditative word. Every breath was like a deep prayer. The shimmering candlelight dances on the walls, creating a warm and tranquil space, reflecting the deep stillness in the Zen master's soul. However, that serenity did not last long. Suddenly, the front door swung open violently, and a man with tattered, dirty clothes walked in, swinging a sharp sword that gleamed in the candlelight. The man's eyes were wild and full of despair. His breathing was rushing because he had just run away from something. Apparently, he chose this isolated house because he believed it would be an easy target for his theft. The thief spoke in a trembling voice, a mixture of fear and aggression. Your money or your life? He expects the old Zen master to be frightened, cower, beg, or struggle to save his life or property. But that didn't happen. Shichiri didn't even look up from his sutra book, still calmly continued to read, his voice steady and even. After a moment, he stopped and said to the intruder in a calm, almost gentle voice, as if he were asking someone to close the door. Please don't disturb my practice. If you need money, help yourself. The money is in the drawer over there. He gestured toward a simple wooden chest, then returned to his reading as if nothing unusual had happened. The thief stood stunned, his sword still raised, completely bewildered and unsure of how to deal with the Zen master's incredible composure. In all his years of stealing, he had never encountered such a reaction. No fear, no begging, no anger, just an action of help. Shaking his head in confusion, the thief moved towards the designated drawer and began collecting the coins and small valuables he found there, while the soft chanting continued to echo behind him. As the thief prepared to leave with the stolen property, the calm voice of the owner of the house rang out again. "Wait," Shichiri said, finally looking up from the book. "Please don't take everything. I need some of that money to pay my taxes tomorrow. Leave a little to me, okay?" The thief looked at him in amazement. This was a man who had been robbed, but calmly negotiated the terms of the robbery as if it were a normal, everyday transaction. Almost without thinking, the thief returned part of the money to the Zen master. As he turned his back to leave, Shichiri called out again, "You took my money, but you don't even know how to say thank you. That's very rude, don't you think?" This last remark took the thief completely by surprise, and the hand holding the sword began to tremble. Never before in violent encounters had he felt so anxious and confused. A man who sees stealing as a job or a favor is now taught by the robbed person a lesson in courtesy and respect, rather than fear or confrontation. Finally, the thief stammered thanks and fled into the night, as fast as his legs could carry him. Later, when the thief was arrested and confessed to many crimes, including the incident at Shichiri's house, the Zen master was called as a witness in court. Court officials expected him to describe the terror, fear, and abuse he endured. But Shichiri said calmly, "This man didn't steal anything from me. I gave him the money freely, and he thanked me for it." His testimony was a clear calm, full of kindness and selflessness. It is said that these words made the thief feel that something was broken in his heart, a deep awakening. For the first time in years, his tears were shed, not out of pity or anger, but tears of recognition, of an unprecedented experience, unconditional love. After completing his prison term, the former thief approached Shichiri, begging to be his student. Under the teacher's patient guidance and unconditional love, he learned to cultivate the fearless compassion he witnessed that night. Years later, through his dedicated practice and firm belief in his transformational potential, he gained deep peace and enlightened wisdom. This story testifies to the Buddha's teaching that hatred does not end with hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule, the truth that anyone who seeks peace and happiness needs to remember. What stands out from the story is the revolutionary power of confronting violence with absolute peace, responding with giving, and responding to fear with love. Why do we assume that force must be met with force, that aggression requires a defensive response? Zen Buddhism shows us that this pattern, however instinctive, often only perpetuates the cycle of suffering and conflict that it wants to end. When we respond to hostility with hostility, we are only accelerating that negative spiral, adding to the suffering on both sides. But when we respond with genuine compassion, not passive submission, but active love, we create a space for transformation, a space without which compassion would not exist. Take a deep look at your own experience. When someone approaches you with anger, criticism, or demands, what is your first natural reaction? Most of us are immediately prepared to defend, counterattack, or retreat. But pay attention to how that affects your mind and body. Does stress increase or decrease? Will the conflict be resolved or become more intense? Shichiri's teachings exemplify the skillful means of meditation, acting from wisdom and insight, not reflexive instincts. His fearlessness did not come from naivety or lack of awareness of danger, but from a deep understanding of the nature of reality, of the deep causes of suffering and action. He understood that the thief's aggression stemmed from despair and suffering, not from innate malice. By refusing to see him as an enemy, Shichiri created an opportunity for the thief to see himself differently, opening up the possibility of inner transformation. In the practice of meditation, we practice what might be called the courage of defenselessness, a state that is not innocence or carelessness to danger, but confidence that is great enough to deal with difficulties with the highest intellect rather than the lowest instinctive reaction. The Buddha taught that in the end, there are only three things that matter in life: how well to live, how much to love, and how well to let go. Shichiri is the living embodiment of all three in his encounter with the thief. He lives fully, loves unconditionally, and lets go of all attachments, including to property or personal safety. Think about the people in your life who challenge you, be it a difficult coworker, a complicated family member, or an aggressive driver in traffic. How would you feel if you responded to their energy with fearless compassion, as Shichiri did? It's not about agreeing with their behavior or blindly complying with demands. It's about refusing to react to the level of tension and hostility they create. Staying connected to your inner peace center, regardless of what the outside world is like. This is the path to liberation, to live a more peaceful and fulfilling life. From the story of the chrysanthemum garden to the lessons of the Zen master Shichiri, we are called to look back at ourselves, to learn to love freely, to live gently, and to let go wisely. It is a poignant reminder to anyone who wants to live a meaningful life in the midst of this turbulent and challenging world, that true love is not possession, but freedom. That sincere compassion is not weakness, but strength. And letting go is not failure, but growth. These are the three jewels of Buddhist wisdom that help us find peace in life, even though the world is constantly changing. Tonight, when you are faced with moments of tension or inner conflict, you can imagine the image of the host who treated the robber like a guest of honor, completely and calmly to a rarity. In such moments, you can find the magical space between external stimuli and your natural reaction, where the choice of how to live is truly originated. It is a place where you can choose to face aggression with peace, receive with giving, and face fear with love. This is the space of wisdom and compassion, where the soul is not bound by negative emotions, but instead with clarity and peace. The Buddha's wisdom once emphasized that sometimes the value of a word that brings peace is greater than 1,000 empty words. It's a reminder that the strongest response to violence is not necessarily drastic action or retaliation, but sometimes simply unwavering steadfastness in commitment to compassion. It is the understanding that love possesses a profoundly transformative power that no physical power or power can compare. When we stand firm in that kindness, we become an inspiration and transform even the most difficult circumstances. Continuing on the path of Zen wisdom, we are called to discover a profound story of contentment and the nature of desire, the story of the stonecutter in the high mountains. This stonecutter lives a simple and serene life. Every day, he wakes up at dawn, climbs the winding roads that lead to the quarries, carrying his stone-carving tools on his shoulders. As he worked among the large rocks, he sang traditional songs, his singing echoing throughout the mountain valleys. Despite being poor by social standards, living in a simple hut and owning very few material possessions, the stonecutter wanted nothing more than what he had. His simple life gave him a sense of completeness and depth, the steady rhythm of work, the the majestic beauty of the mountains and forests, and the satisfaction of true labor. In his heart, the world does not hold an important place. He is satisfied with everything that exists. However, that peaceful life is shaken when one day he is invited to work for a wealthy aristocrat in a lavish mansion. As he approached the place, his eyes widened at the magnificent scenery that appeared before him. Marble columns soaring to the sky, intricately manicured gardens stretching out in perfect symmetry. This was the first time the stonecutter felt a sharp pain of desire, a deep-seated sense of relief at the sight of wealth he had never known. He whispered in his heart, "If only I were rich, then I wouldn't have to work as hard and sweat as I do now." But a strange thing happened. A whispered voice came from the rocks, saying that his wish had been granted, that from now on, whatever he wished would be given. That evening, when he returned home, the stonecutter was astonished to find that his simple hut had been transformed into a magnificent mansion no less than a nobleman's. Overwhelmed with joy and surprise, he put down his old tools of labor and began to enjoy the luxurious life of the upper class. But then, one sweltering afternoon, as he sat in his lavishly decorated room with large windows looking out, he watched the royal procession pass by. The king sat in the shade, surrounded by nobles and his entourage, looking serene and strong under the scorching heat of the sun. In his head resounded a new wish. If only I were a king. Immediately, he found himself reclining on a silk cushion in the royal carriage, feeling the luxury and power. But the chariot wasn't as cool as it seemed. On the contrary, the temperature inside was still very hot, making him feel uncomfortable. He continued to wish, "I wish I were the sun," and suddenly found himself emitting waves of light and heat, radiating throughout the universe. A sense of magnificence and power spread through him, but then thick storm clouds came, completely covering his light. Once again, he changed shape, becoming a giant storm cloud, boasting of its ability to obscure the sun. But when it turned into rain, he bumped into a huge rock blocking his path, making him realize that the simple rock was much stronger than himself. Again, he wished, "I want to be a rock." Suddenly, he stood tall on the mountainside, feeling eternity and enduring strength. But soon after, he heard the clicking of the stonecutter beneath his feet, and saw a small stonecutter working hard, a creature smaller than him, but with the power to control him. Eventually, he wished he could be a man again, and so he found himself again as a stonecutter, climbing familiar mountain roads. This time, the miracle happened. The stonecutter changed, not in shape or circumstance, but in the soul. As he shaped each stone and felt the cool mountain breeze, his heart was filled with a deeper satisfaction than before. The songs he hummed became richer and richer, because he learned to be content with who he was and the simple life he always had. The Buddha once taught that health is the greatest gift, contentment is the greatest wealth. This ancient teaching illuminates the endless cycle of desire, leaving us unaware of the abundance inherent in our present lives. Why do we always run after different conditions, believing that happiness will come when we get the next new thing? Each desire, when satisfied, only opens up another, forming a vicious cycle of endless dissatisfaction. The story of the stonecutter shows the futility of seeking happiness through external circumstances and invites us to look deeply into our own version of that cycle. I'll be happy when I get promoted, but then new tensions resurface. I'll be happy to have more money, but wealth brings new worries. Each achievement points the way to the next challenging mountain for us to climb. Zen Master Suzuki Roshi once said, "Each one of you is perfect in his own way, and you can use a little improvement." This paradox points to the heart of contentment, the ability to fully accept what is available while wholeheartedly participating in the natural transformations of life. The ultimate transformation of the stonecutter is not to become something greater, but to recognize and appreciate one's own inherent completeness. His work is still the same, but his relationship with life has changed completely. Contentment does not come from different experiences, but from bringing a different perception to whatever experience arises. Tonight, when you realize the habit of the mind always looking for what is not here, can you experiment with the ultimate wisdom of the stonecutter? Can you find your own song, the song that comes out when you stop trying to be anything other than your true self? The Buddha taught that contentment is natural wealth, luxury is the artificial poverty. The biggest transformation is not to be someone different, but to realize the wholeness that is inherent in what we are. Let's continue our journey with another story, the story of the unexpected wisdom found in laughter and pain when we take ourselves too seriously. These stories and lessons invite us to look at ourselves with tolerance and understanding. In the midst of the chaos of modern life, when we place so much emphasis on success, status, and social norms, it's easy to forget that happiness and peace don't lie in those things, but in acceptance, gratitude, and deep satisfaction with the present. This is the understanding that Zen Buddhism and the Buddha's teachings impart. In order to live a full and peaceful life, we need to learn to let go of endless desires, to refuse to run after ever-changing conditions, and instead to look at the present life with a complete and serene mind. It is in that simplicity and humility that we find true wealth, inner richness, and an unconditional love for ourselves and the world around us. This is the story of a young monk in an ancient monastery in the high mountains of China, who began his spiritual journey with a spirit of dedication and absolute seriousness. He spent the whole day meditating, and every morning before dawn broke, he woke up and sat in a perfect meditative posture, not moving for hours. He also studied the Buddhist scriptures carefully and thoroughly, memorizing every sentence and passage, and debating with other monks with his concentration and sharp reason. Everyone in the monastery commented on his seriousness and enthusiasm, saying that he was a model of a true practitioner. One fresh and cool autumn morning, while studying a particularly deep and complex passage concerning the nature of emptiness, the young monk encountered something that completely puzzled him. The passage seems very clear one by one, but as he tries to understand the whole meaning, it all seems to dissolve into a paradox, making it impossible for him to grasp its spirit. Determined to find the answer, he carefully marked his thoughts and went up to meet the old monastery's teacher, whom he revered and considered his true master. The old master sat in a simple little room, the sunlight penetrating through the paper window, forming patterns of light and shadow, dancing on the wooden floor. The young monk bowed deeply and presented his question and confusion, reading the sutra correctly and explaining the different interpretations that he had tried but were still not satisfied. The teacher listened attentively, nodding occasionally, his deep eyes showing concern. But when the monk finished, something unexpected happened. The teacher suddenly burst out laughing, first with a bright smile, then with a giggle, and finally exploding into an uncontrollable, hearty laugh. The teacher's whole body trembled with joy. Tears of happiness fell on his old, wrinkled face. The young monk stood there, stiff in shock, completely incomprehensible to this reaction. He had anticipated a profound explanation, a subtle instruction, but instead it was just wordless laughter, which filled the room, echoing from the walls and seemingly getting stronger and stronger. The teacher didn't explain further, still smiled, got up and walked out of the room, leaving the young monk in a state of confusion, and growing distress. For the next 3 days, that laughter did not stop haunting him. He could barely eat or drink, his meditation was interrupted, his mind was unfocused, and his sleep was very short and restless. The question in his mind kept spinning. Why would a sincere spiritual search be met with such incomprehensible enjoyment? His fellow monks clearly saw his distressed state, but when they asked him, the monk only responded in a vague and confused way. He felt humiliated, confused, and stressed. Is the teacher mocking his understanding? Is your question stupid? Will the years of devotion to cultivation and study become meaningless? In the end, unable to bear the torment, he decided to go back to see the teacher again. This time without bowing his head, not reciting the sutras, but speaking directly from the bottom of his heart. He said, "Master, for the past 3 days, I have been very distressed by your response to my question. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, I couldn't meditate. Please tell me, why do you laugh at my sincere search? What did you do wrong?" The teacher's expression became gentle and compassionate. He motioned for the monk to sit down beside him, and then said clearly and gently, "Monk, do you know what your problem is? Your problem is worse than a clown." The sentence was like a direct blow to the monk's heart. He opened his eyes wide, shocked and disappointed. Unbelievable. "Sir, how can that be? I have dedicated my life to spiritual practice, trying to understand the Buddha's teachings, giving up all worldly pleasures to pursue wisdom with all my heart. How can you compare me to an entertainer?" The teacher smiled warmly and explained, "The greatest joy of a clown is to make people laugh, and when others laugh, he feels happy and fulfilled. The purpose of the clown is to bring joy and lightness to the world. But I am the opposite. When others laugh, I am confused, sad, and tormented. Then, aren't you worse than a clown?" Hearing these words, a flash of understanding flashed in the monk's mind, like the dawn through a thick fog. He realized that his attachment to being taken seriously and valued by others was the cause of his suffering. He was so invested in the image of a serious practitioner that he could not receive the mere joy and serenity of the master. The teacher's laughter was not a mockery, but a pure joy at the beauty of the Buddhist Dharma, which existed through the paradoxes and contradictions that he had found difficult to understand. In that moment, the monk began to laugh. At first, it was a gentle laugh, then gradually became free and full of joy. He laughs at his own excessive seriousness, laughs at his attachment to understanding, laughs at the absurdity of seeking enlightenment at all costs. His laughter blended with the laughter of the teacher from 3 days earlier, creating a space filled with joy and deep understanding. In that joy, understanding germinates naturally and deeply. The Buddha once taught that, when you light a lamp for others, that light also illuminates your own path. The profound meaning of this lesson is to recognize how our reactions to others reflect our inner state of mind. Why are we confused when others express joy in ways we don't understand? Zen Buddhism points out some of the main causes of this suffering. The first is our strong attachment to being understood and validated. The monk's anxiety did not come from his laughter, but from his own need to be taken seriously and properly. The second is our identification with the spiritual image we build. When we get too attached to being seen as a sincere practitioner, an excellent student, or a knowledgeable teacher, we lose the spontaneity and openness necessary to receive a sincere lesson. The monk's investment in his serious identity prevented him from taking the lesson through that laughter. The third is our limited understanding of how to communicate wisdom. We often expect catechism to come in familiar forms, formal explanations, logical analyses, or orthodox sermons. But enlightenment often comes suddenly from small windows that no one expects. The laughter of a master, the innocent question of a child, the sound of a small bell, or an ordinary but meaningful moment. We often miss out on valuable teachings just because they don't live up to our expectations. Maybe a casual statement from someone less educated than us contains the understanding we need, but we don't pay attention because of prejudice. Maybe life teaches us through unpleasant situations that people consider trivial. Zen master Suzuki Roshi once said, "In the mind of a beginner, there are countless possibilities, but in the mind of an expert, it is very limited." The young monk's expertise and certainty became a barrier to deep learning, preventing him from realizing the lesson through that unexpected laughter. The story raises a fundamental question. Are we seeking true understanding, or do we just want to be understood by others? Are we open enough to embrace wisdom in all its forms, or do we just want it to validate our rigid prejudices and beliefs? The laughter of the master is a lesson in the joy inherent in Dharma, joy that transcends logic and rigid seriousness. Tonight, when you encounter other people's reactions that don't match your expectations, remember the young monk's revelation. Maybe someone's laughter when you expect seriousness, their arbitrariness when you hope for depth, or their joy when you feel the situation needs dignity are silent teachings you haven't realized. The Buddha once said, "Thousands of candles can be lit from a single candle, and the lifespan of the candle will not be shortened." Happiness never diminishes when shared. The teacher's laughter does not diminish the purity of the Dharma, but rather the celebration of the endless joy that the Dharma brings. This is the joy that the young monk has finally realized he can share with others instead of against. Through this story, we learn that the path to enlightenment is not always solemn and contemplative, but is sometimes guided by lightness, spontaneous joy, and openness to the unexpected in life. The story of the intelligent monkey in ancient China offers a profound lesson about the potential dangers of divine superiority and the pride that comes from personal achievement. During that period, the prince of the Wu kingdom decided to take a boat excursion to Monkey Mountain, a place famous not only for its majestic natural scenery, but also for the diversity of wildlife, especially the monkeys that live freely in the forest. Accompanying the prince was a large entourage of concubines, guards, and officials, all of whom showed respect and admiration for their royal position. The prince walked up the mountain with the confident and proud look typical of a chief, believing that the natural world would conform to his presence as his subjects always revered and obeyed. However, the reaction of the monkeys was completely different from the prince's expectations. As soon as the monkeys in the forest noticed the royal group approaching, they immediately panicked and ran away, climbing the highest branches to find safety. the usual noise and joy of the forest suddenly fell silent, leaving only the gentle rustling of the leaves under the movement of the monkeys seeking shelter. Their natural instincts lead them to see humans as a threat and choose to hide safely instead of contact. While most of the monkeys withdrew, there was one monkey in particular that showed no fear in the presence of the prince and his entourage. This monkey continued his skillful acrobatics, swinging from branch to branch with agility and decisiveness, performing elaborate dances like a freelance artist who was not concerned with the dangers of the ground or the presence of powerful men. The monkey's calmness and dexterity made the prince more and more uncomfortable. With the attitude of a chief, he could not accept that a wild animal would challenge his authority and dignity by showing disrespect, refusing to bow respectfully. The monkey's confidence and defiance were seen by the prince as a direct insult, an insult in front of his entourage. Determined to prove his authority and teach the animal a lesson, the prince drew his bow and arrow and fired an arrow directly at the monkey. But the unexpected happened that surprised everyone. The monkey, with quick reflexes, caught the arrow right in the air, gently pulled it out, and threw it aside as if it were just childish play that was not worth bothering about. This action not only showed the monkey's extraordinary abilities, but also a great challenge to the prince, causing him to be angry and his face darkened from the humiliation. The prince felt that his archery skills, which had been a source of pride, had been made a joke by a mere wild animal. Without hesitation, he ordered his entourage to attack the monkey, asking them to take down this arrogant beast. A series of arrows are fired, and this time the monkey is overwhelmed, unable to dodge them all, and finally gets hit by multiple arrows and falls to the forest ground. Despite its superior abilities, the monkey cannot resist the overwhelming and coordinated power of humans. The prince turned to his wise companion, Yen Pui, who observed the whole thing with a deeply understanding eye. The prince asked his companion, "This animal is confident because of its abilities, believing that no one can touch it. Remember this lesson. Never rely on difference or talent when dealing with people." These words were imprinted in the mind of Yen Puyaoi, who later, when he returned to the kingdom, reflected a lot on the dangers of pride and personal superiority. Yen Pui decided to become a disciple of a humble sage in order to remove every element that made him stand out or special. He gave up the pleasures and privileges that once defined his status and learned to hide any differences that might set him apart from others. Through persistent practice and patience, Yen Pui cultivated such genuine humility that before long, no one in the kingdom knew how to treat him. He became so ordinary, so simple and unassuming, that people began to notice something deep beneath that simple exterior, a mysterious and serene depth that attracted them not because of what he showed, but because of his subtle and genuine presence. The Buddha once said, "Those who know do not speak. Those who speak do not know," emphasizing that true humility does not need to be ostentatious or boastful. The story of the intelligent monkey is a warning about the danger of turning our divine insights or abilities into a source of identity and pride. Why do we feel the need to demonstrate our special knowledge or virtue? Zen Buddhism teaches that the ego tends to hijack even our truest understandings in order to turn them into tools for maintaining separation and a sense of superiority. Achievements that can actually help us overcome our separate egos become meaningless if we identify with that progress or enlightenment. Spiritual pride, like the monkey in the story, can become the biggest barrier to true growth and maturity. The monkey has developed extraordinary abilities through practice and wisdom, but makes the grave mistake of considering himself to be special, different, and superior to others, instead of seeing it as a temporary manifestation of universal wisdom. The Buddha once taught, "Better than 1,000 empty words is a word that brings peace," and that emphasizes the power of humility, true simplicity in the soul. Yenpui realized that by hiding all his differences and becoming normal, he had access to a deeper influence, one that was not based on performance or expression, but that came from a sincere, warm, and humble presence. This story invites us to reflect on our own spiritual journey. Do we have times, moments when divine insights, abilities, or qualities turn into subtle sources of pride? When the experience of meditation, psychological insight, or compassionate actions becomes a way for us to feel different or superior to others? Such pride is the path to failure to truly develop spiritually and live up to the essence of enlightenment. The more we make real progress, the more invisible and humble that progress becomes, expressing the interconnected and harmonious nature of all existence, removing all grounds for superiority or separation. Zen master Shunryu Suzuki spoke of the unknowing mind as the nature of the beginning mind. Not ignorance, but a deep awareness of the limitations of conceptual knowledge and penetration into the mystery of existence. The tragedy of the monkey is that he does not recognize his intellect as part of universal wisdom, but makes it his own specialness. The story of Prince Wu, the monkey, and Yenpui is a reminder that true strength does not come from showing up, but from sincere humility and the ability to blend in with the general flow of life. It is the path to harmony, peace, and profound influence in life, away from the temptations of pride and personal superiority. Every time we make spiritual practice or any path of self-development an integral part of our personal identity, we inadvertently create a spiritual equivalent to the dangerous ostentation of the monkey in the ancient story. Treating divine achievements, knowledge, or abilities as special signs, what sets us apart or even superior to others, not only increases the ego, but also creates a false shell that separates us from the profound truth about ourselves and the world around us. True practice, on the other hand, is art that is no one special. It is a rest in simple being, in a state of normalcy and stillness of awareness, where we no longer have to prove or show anything. It is true freedom that does not come from the display of wisdom or power, but from letting go and merging into the mysterious, into the vast flow of life of which we are an inseparable part. As the Buddha once taught, those who have overcome clinging to resentment and negative thoughts will inevitably find the deepest peace. That true peace is not a temporary state that comes when things are going well, but a liberation from the attachments to peace itself. That is, even if we try to cling to peace, it's just another form of attachment. When we let go of all attachments to emotions or states, we achieve true freedom. It is in this state, no matter what the external circumstances may be, that we retain balance, silence, and inner clarity. And that's the profound lesson that Hakuin's story brings us today. A story about maintaining inner balance, unaffected by the reactions of the outside world. Master Hakuin is a Zen master who lives in a small village, who is deeply respected by everyone for his wisdom, compassion, and exemplary character. For decades, he maintained a reputation as a pure and enlightened teacher, one who overcame human weaknesses and embodied the highest divine ideals. The people of the village often turned to him with their problems, hoping to receive guidance and inspiration from his simple but profound teachings and lifestyle. He was the ideal model that people admired and respected, not only for his erudite knowledge, but also for his calm, humble, and compassionate way of life. However, in that very village, there was a beautiful young woman who came from a well-known and respected family. When she became pregnant unexpectedly and out of wedlock, the event caused a major scandal that shook the entire close-knit community. Her parents, filled with anger and frustration, demanded the identity of the man responsible for bringing the shame to their family. At first, the young girl is adamant not to reveal the identity of the child's father, trying to protect her beloved, who, if the truth is exposed, will ruin her reputation and future. But under the increasing pressure and unquenchable anger of her parents, she fell into a desperate situation. In a moment of panic and confusion, she pointed to Master Hakuin, the only person she thought could withstand and weather this storm better than her true lover. When her parents confronted the Zen master and accused him, they expected a strong resistance, an explanation, or at least an expression of anger or indignation at being slandered. But instead, Hakuin just listened quietly and answered only one question. Is that so? This simple answer, while seemingly indifferent, serves as a tacit confirmation that makes them more angry, because an innocent person will often try to defend himself. The scandal quickly spread throughout the village, prompting those who once revered Hakuin to now whisper that he was a hypocrite who lived a lie. His reputation was destroyed overnight, and his former disciples abandoned him in disgust and frustration. When the child is born, the girl's parents decide to hand the baby over to Hakuin, claiming that he is now responsible for being the child's father. They put the newborn baby in his arms and left, leaving him to face the consequences of a crime he did not commit. Again, Hakuin responded with a simple, "Is that so?" and received the child calmly, without protest or explanation. Throughout the next several months, he cared for the baby with all the tenderness and devotion of a father. He feeds the baby, changes the diaper, stays up at night lulling the baby, and gives all the love and care that any devoted parent does. Meanwhile, neighbors who used to bring food and show respect to him now turn their backs on him or speak ill of him with contempt. He had lost everything: his status, his fame, and his livelihood. But even so, he continued to care for the child in unshakable inner peace. The story of Hakuin is even more profound when we look at the young woman's feelings. She lives in torment for her lies and witnesses her revered master suffer unfairly while lovingly caring for the child. The guilt grew heavier, to the point where she finally couldn't take it anymore and decided to confess the truth to her parents. The child's real father is a young man in the village whom she has been trying to protect from the beginning. When she learned the truth, her parents deeply regretted hurting an innocent person. They rushed to Hakuin's house, apologized to him deeply, and begged for redemption by taking the child back to his true family. Hakuin still listened calmly to those apologies and gently placed the child in their arms, continuing to reply with the familiar phrase, "Is that so?" This response, in a profound way, shows a complete disengagement with reputation, truth, or any social reaction. This spirit reflects the Buddha's wisdom that hatred never ends with hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal law of life, and it is from this story that we see the profound power of maintaining inner balance, regardless of how the outside world judges or reacts to us. The big question is, why do we let external events and other people's opinions determine our inner state? Zen Buddhism teaches that true freedom comes from building a solid, unshakable inner center, a mental stability that keeps us balanced whether we are praised or criticized, honored or humiliated, treated fairly or unjustly. Hakuin's answer to "Is that so?" is emblematic of such a profound spiritual practice, not indifference or passivity, but an absolute non-attachment to fame, status, and even the concept of justice. That unwavering response shows that he drew his value and purpose from within, not from external validation or evaluation. If we try to imagine the common reaction of most people in the face of false accusations, public humiliation, or loss of reputation, it is strong resistance, trying to protect ourselves, fighting against injustice, and demanding that others see the truth. But Hakuin's approach reveals a different possibility: to respond to any situation with the same acceptance, calmness, and peace. This does not mean that we should never defend ourselves or passively accept all injustice, but rather the subtle teaching that inner peace does not necessarily depend on the fairness or convenience of external circumstances. We can stay focused no matter how the world treats us. The Buddha once taught, "You will not be punished for your anger. You will be punished by that very anger." Hakuin's deep equality protected him from further suffering due to resentment, self-pity, or futile attempts to restore his reputation. No matter how difficult the situation was, he did not increase it with negative emotional reactions. This lesson invites us to look deeply at our own reactions to criticism, misunderstandings, or unfair treatment. Ask yourself, how much of the suffering we feel actually comes from external events, and how much of it is due to our mental and emotional reactions to those events? Hakuin's example shows that we have far greater control over the second source of suffering, that is, how we react, feel, and think about what happens, than the first objective external facts. When we know how to master ourselves, how to keep our inner peace in the face of the fluctuations of life, we truly become free and happy. Hakuin's story is a testament to the power of letting go, of non-attachment, and of true peace. It shows that the path of meditation is not just a method to attain wisdom or enlightenment, but also an art of living. The art of keeping an inner balance in the midst of all circumstances, unswayed by the events and judgments of others. This is an invaluable lesson about true freedom, about how we can live with a serene and open mind, unencumbered by external limitations, judgments, or expectations, but completely let go and immerse ourselves in the mystery of existence itself. Tonight, as you face any judgment, misunderstanding, or unfair treatment that life may bring, can you find deep peace by remembering Master Hakuin's story? Can you create a gap between what happens to you and how you react to those events? You may realize that your inner peace doesn't have to be held hostage by external circumstances, that your inner freedom doesn't depend on the attitudes or actions of others or the situation around you. This is the lesson that the Buddha's wisdom has taught us for a long time. Peace comes from within, not something we need to look for outside, but is always present within us. When we grow spiritually in an authentic way, not by measuring the goodness that life brings us, but by learning to meet all living conditions with grace, compassion, dignity, and serenity in our souls, regardless of whether the world recognizes our worth or understands their true nature or not. Let's continue our inner journey with another story, which illustrates more clearly how our inner landscape shapes our outer experience. The story follows two towns located in a bustling market, where street vendors and tourists frequently stop to rest on their long journeys. In the midst of that bustling space, a wise Zen master opened a humble tea stand, attracting people not only by his refreshing drinks, but also by his reputation as a teacher who brought practical wisdom, especially to those who were facing major changes and uncertainties in their lives. On a particular day, two men approached the tea stand, each carrying the same question, but displaying very different attitudes, energies, and moods. Both were strangers to the land, and they were both considering whether or not the town could become their new home. The first man arrives with a tense face, shoulders carrying the burden of frustration that accumulates over time. As he approached the tea counter, his eyes swept around with a suspicious look, constantly judging and finding faults in what he observed. He opened up bluntly. "I'm thinking of moving to this town. What is it like?" The Zen master looked at him with gentle attention, not only listening to the words, but also feeling the quality of energy that the man carried in the question. Instead of rushing to answer or describe the town right away, the teacher decided to ask the guest a question. "What is your old town like?" The first man responded quickly, as if he had carefully rehearsed these complaints many times before. "It's terrible. Everyone is hateful and unfriendly. The neighbors don't care. The shopkeepers were very rude. And the whole place is full of selfish, annoying people. I can't stand it there anymore." The Zen master nodded thoughtfully, his expression still full of compassion, despite the stream of bitter complaints pouring out of his guest's mouth. "It's the same with this town," he replied simply. "I don't think you should move here." The man's face darkened with frustration. He didn't say another word, turned away and muttered that perhaps this place was as bad as everywhere else. As soon as the first man left, the second traveler approached the tea stand. His mannerisms were completely different from those of his predecessors. He was relaxed, curious, and open-minded. His eyes looked around with appreciation rather than judgment, and when he smiled at the Zen master, it was a smile that came from a warm and sincere place. "I'm thinking of moving to this town," he said softly, naturally. "What is it like?" The Zen master listened to this visitor with careful attention, once again not rushing to judge, but choosing to learn more. "How is your old town?" he asked. The second man's face lit up as he considered the question thoroughly. "It's wonderful," he replied, with affection evident in his voice. "Everyone is very friendly and helpful. My neighbors care about each other. The local merchants knew people's names and had a real sense of community. I'm very happy there. I'm just considering a change because I want to look for new adventures and opportunities." The Zen master smiled and said, "This town is the same. I think you'll like it a lot here." The second man smiled excitedly, thanked the master, and walked with an energetic step, having seen positive possibilities and connections in his new environment. The Buddha's wisdom teaches us that all that we are is the result of what we have thought. The mind is everything. What we think of ourselves and the world becomes a reality in our experience. This insight explains the stark difference in how the Zen master responded to the two visitors. He gave identical answers to both because he found that their questions and words revealed more about their inner state than about the outer reality of the town. This is one of the most fundamental principles of human experience. We do not see the world as it is, but as we are. He has proven that people who find community and kindness wherever they go are not because the environment is perfect, but because their outlook and inner state help them see and connect with the good. Others, on the other hand, may experience hostility and frustration in the same environment, simply because they carry negative psychological filters or mental habits influenced by past bad experiences or inherently inflexible thought patterns. According to Buddhist psychology, our cognitive filters are formed by habitual mental patterns, and these patterns literally create the reality we experience. We often pay attention only to evidence that confirms current beliefs, while ignoring or dismissing conflicting information. The first man in the story embodies what modern psychology calls negative attribution bias, the tendency to interpret ambiguous situations in the most negative way possible. His mind is like a magnet, attracting negative experiences, not because the world is inherently hostile, but because it is what he is conditioned to see. The second man exhibits the opposite pattern. He assumes the best in others and seeks positive connections, exhibiting a generous attribution style. His mind is in tune with kindness and connection. If we look more closely in everyday life, we will see that two people may work in the same office but have completely different experiences. One person may see politics, competition, and dysfunction everywhere, while the other finds opportunities for mentorship, collaboration, and growth in the same environment. This does not mean that objective conditions are not important or that all experiences are equally positive, but it does point to the immense influence of mental habits in shaping our living reality. As Zen master John Kabat-Zinn once said, "Wherever you go, you are there." We carry our inner weather with us, and it colors everything we encounter. The wisdom of the teacher lies in the realization that no external change of position can solve the problem of the first man. If he moves to this town with the same negative perception filter, he will only recreate the frustrating experiences he was trying to escape from. This insight has great implications for how we face changes in our lives and solve problems. Often, when we are dissatisfied with our current circumstances, our first instinct is to change our external conditions. But if we don't address the inner mental patterns that create dissatisfaction, then we will simply take the same problems with us to a new place. However, this principle does not only apply one way. When we cultivate positive mental habits, such as appreciation, curiosity, and goodwill, we will begin to see more evidence to support that view. The world doesn't change magically, but our ability to recognize its positive virtues expands dramatically. Tonight, as you reflect on your own experiences in community, work, and relationships, you may ask yourself, through what lens do you usually view those interactions? Like the first traveler, looking for problems and frustrations, or like the second person, looking for connections and possibilities. As the Buddha taught, the mind is everything. What you think, you will become. The most powerful tool for transforming our external experience lies not in changing circumstances, but in changing the cognitive qualities that we carry with us to whatever circumstances we encounter. And now, we will continue with another story about the difference between seeing and being seen, between true wisdom and the appearance of wisdom. This is the story of the blind man and his lantern, a story that will shed more light on the profound nature of awareness and understanding in life. Late one evening, as darkness gradually envelops the village like a soft and warm blanket, a blind man is preparing to return home after a long day with his best friend. Together they shared warm cups of tea, chatted about life and experiences, and enjoyed the relaxed tranquility, the special silence that can only exist between people who truly understand each other. Now that it was late at night, the space was tinged with the characteristic darkness of the night, and the blind man needed to begin his journey through the winding, dark roads to return to his familiar home. He was standing there, preparing to leave, looking for a cane in his hand, adjusting his robe in the cool night air. His friend, with worried eyes, looked out into the dark streets without a shadow and gently suggested, "Please, let me give you my lantern to carry with me. The streets are particularly dark today, and there are many obstacles on your way." The proposal was spoken with sincerity and deep concern that made the blind pause, surprised and thought for a moment. He asked softly, full of excitement, "Why do I need a lantern?" He knew I couldn't see. Light won't help me find my way better than darkness. My feet are familiar with each of these streets, and my other senses have guided me very well. The friend pondered for a while, and then gently replied, "Maybe the lantern is not to help you see better, but so that others can see you better and not accidentally bump into you when they rush through the dark streets." This reasoning immediately made the blind man feel plausible, for although he had mastered navigating the world without sight, he understood that others were not. They depended on light and sight to perceive their surroundings, and might not notice him in the dark if there was no light that signaled his presence. "Of course," he said, his eyes showing gratitude. "You're so thoughtful." The lantern given to him is a simple but delicate item, made from rice paper stretched thinly on delicate bamboo strips. Inside is a candle that is securely fixed so that it will not be blown out by the wind. His friend lit a candle, and immediately a warm light spread, illuminating a small circle at the feet of the blind man on the ground. Although he couldn't see that light, he could feel the pleasant warmth of the fire, and knew that others on the dark path would easily recognize him from a considerable distance. The blind man began to walk in the darkness, the lantern gently swaying beside him as he made his way towards the familiar house. He felt confident and secure, not only for his own safety, but also for the concern for the safety of others who might be walking on these dark streets. However, after just a few steps, another traveler suddenly walked straight into him, causing a strong impact that caused them both to fall over. The lantern swayed violently, and the blind man almost lost his balance. "Why don't you watch the road?" said the blind man in exasperation, standing up and adjusting his cloak. "Don't you see this lantern? I wear it specially so that people like you don't bump into me." The other traveler, equally surprised, looked at the blind man's lantern and laughed softly. "Friend," he said, "why don't you light a candle? Your lantern is completely dark." The blind man reached out and touched the bamboo frame of the lantern. Sure enough, the candle went out as soon as he left his friend's house, though he didn't know it at all. He walked in the dark, carrying what he believed to be a light source, but it was actually just an empty frame. This story reminds us of the Buddha's teaching. Thousands of candles can be lit from one candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. The deep meaning hidden in this saying is that happiness and wisdom are not lost when shared with others, but on the contrary, they are multiplied and enriched. The story of the blind man and the lantern reveals an important difference between carrying a container of wisdom and actually possessing wisdom. Why do many of us often confuse the outward form of knowledge with true knowledge? In Zen Buddhism, it is realized that we are often attached to the outward symbols of insight. It may be books read, retreats we have attended, or spiritual concepts that we can discuss. But the fire of true awareness, the flame of life experience, has not yet been lit in us. The plight of the blind is very familiar to those who have walked the spiritual path. We have in our hands the lamp of the teachings, surrounded by the framework of practice, and sometimes we assume that possessing these means that we are enlightened. But unless the candle of direct experience burns out, we're still just walking in the dark, believing that we carry the light. Ask yourself, in your own spiritual or philosophical understanding, how much of it is living wisdom, authentic experience? And how much is just conceptual knowledge, an unlit lantern that we carry? This difference only becomes apparent when we face the inevitable collisions of real life, when our understanding is challenged by real-life circumstances. In our Zen practice, we make a clear distinction between knowing about and knowing directly. You can study everything that's ever been written about the taste of an apple, but until you actually take a bite of an apple, your knowledge is still secondary knowledge, not direct knowledge. Similarly, we can accumulate a wealth of knowledge about peace, compassion, or wisdom without ever really demonstrating these qualities in our lives. The blind man in the story is a person with sincere intentions who wants to help others recognize his presence to avoid accidents. But his good intentions are no substitute for the true function of a lighted candle. This is the challenge of all spiritual practice. Not just the desire to become wise or to manifest wisdom, but to actually cultivate direct experience so that wisdom becomes a living reality in the soul. Zen Master Dogen taught, to study Buddha is to study oneself, and to study the ego is to forget the ego. The lantern in the story represents our so-called self, the self we construct as a wise person, a spiritual person, or an enlightened person. As long as we are primarily concerned with maintaining that identity, the true candle of true insight has not been lit in the mind. The traveler who happened to meet the blind man did not show mercy in pointing out the obvious truth that the candle was extinguished. Sometimes we also need others to help us realize that our candle is out, that we are walking in old understanding without nurturing the flame of awareness in the present moment. Take a deep look at your own experience and ask yourself, when have you ever carried an unlit lantern? Maybe it's when you're giving advice that hasn't really integrated into your experience, when you're talking about peace while your heart is still in turmoil, or when you're presenting yourself as if you found the truth you're still struggling to understand. These are not moral or spiritual failures, but simply a sign that it is time to relight the candle. The beauty of this lesson is when we realize that our dark lantern is not the end, but a new beginning. The moment we realize that we have walked in the dark, while we think we are carrying the light, we can stop, find the source of the fire, and relight the candle for our life. The lantern, the external container, is not useless, but it only needs one essential element to function, the flame of wisdom and awareness. In our relationships, careers, and spiritual practices, we often encounter the same motivation. We develop outward forms of expertise, vocabulary, certifications, or appearances of mastery, but sometimes lose connection to the original living nature that inspired us. The marriage counselor may be struggling with his or her own relationship. The teacher may have stopped learning. The spiritual practitioner may have become rigid in their practice, all carrying unlit lanterns. The Buddha taught, "Better than 1,000 empty words is a word that brings peace." A moment of true presence, true compassion, or true understanding can be more illuminating than 5 years of accumulating academic knowledge. The lighted candle, no matter how small, provides practical guidance in a way that an empty lantern, no matter how beautiful, cannot. The practice of meditation requires us to constantly check that our candle is actually burning. Are we speaking from direct experience or just from memory? Do we act from our present awareness or habit? Are we bringing true warmth and light, or are we just expressing the appearance of these qualities? This isn't about perfection or never letting the candle go out, because the candle can always go out naturally. That's what it is. The wind can blow out, candles can burn out, flicker, and fade. The practice is to pay attention to the moment the fire has been extinguished and to have enough humility to relight it, rather than pretending that it is still burning. The story of the blind man and his lantern is a living metaphor for our spiritual journey, a reminder that true understanding comes only from direct experience, from the living flame of awareness nurtured in each present moment, not from external forms or abstract concepts. When we realize the necessity of keeping that candle burning, we truly walk the path of wisdom, of awakening, and of inner freedom. This evening, as you take time to reflect on the different roles you are playing and the wisdom you believe you have in your life, you may find that you need to honestly assess which lanterns are actually being lit in your journey. Where is true knowledge present in your life? And vice versa. Are there times when you are relying only on the appearance of knowledge, but have not really gained true discernment? Do you have the courage to recognize and acknowledge the dark lanterns you are still carrying, which are not to be ashamed of, but are just a precious opportunity for you to awaken and cultivate your true understanding? The Buddha's wisdom always reminds us that there are three things that cannot be hidden for long: the sun, the moon, and the truth. No matter how much you try to hide or cover it up, the darkness of an unlit lantern will be clearly revealed through the inevitable collisions with the reality of life. But instead of waiting for those collisions to happen to realize it, you can choose to care for and preserve the fire within you with sincere care, just as we cherish any precious source of light. When that fire burns brightly, it not only helps illuminate your own path, but it also spreads light to help others find their way. Tonight, as our shared discovery draws to a close, you may realize that the profound tranquility you have discovered is not something that needs to be attained, but simply something that you have always had, just sometimes forgotten. You may also feel that this profound stillness exists not only in the sacred teachings, but is also available in your own nature as an always present awareness, patiently waiting to be acknowledged and appreciated. The Buddha taught, peace comes from within. Don't look for it outside. As you contemplate this profound wisdom, you will realize that serenity and understanding do not depend on perfect conditions or extraordinary experiences, but are nourished from the inner landscape of the soul. in every breath you breathe in and out. Throughout tonight's discovery, all the teachings have woven a common thread, revealing a fundamental, liberating truth. The struggle, the inner conflicts will gradually dissipate when we stop fighting against ourselves and the things that happen in life. True freedom is not the result of achieving the desired things, but the natural state that flows when we let go of our attachment to the outcome, when we find satisfaction not in external things, but in observing life clearly. Go beyond routines and automatic reactions. Even when your thoughts sometimes wander or tension creep back into your mind, the insights you have gained tonight are deeply rooted in the rich foundation of who you are, ready to nurture and support you whenever you need guidance. Remember that as you settle into this state of rest, the timeless wisdom we have discovered is not some distant destination, but a way of life, living in each present moment with full presence and a deep acceptance of everything around you in the stillness that surrounds you. They can now notice that their perspective has been deepened. Their breathing has become deeper and easier. Their minds are also gently resting, no longer being overwhelmed by burdens, but absorbing everything comfortably. Today's teachings serve as a gentle reminder that true knowledge is not hidden in distant monasteries or buried in ancient manuscripts. Indeed, it shines brightly and clearly through the idyllic beauty of conscious attention, when we stop, breathe, and see reality honestly. Tonight, you got a taste of that reality. A reality that happens when we simply stop and recognize what is happening in each moment. As you return to the rhythm of your daily lives, bring with you not only the words or knowledge, but also the profound stillness and clarity that you awakened in tonight's experience. May that tranquility always be your faithful companion, illuminating the path through good times as well as difficult times in the future. The peace you find tonight is never really lost. It's just waiting for you to come back to yourself, to come home in your own soul and awareness. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Wish them a good night and dream peaceful dreams, carrying in their hearts the fire of wisdom and peace.